I don't come into any fight with any other mindset than to just kick it.
Brock Lesnar has always been brutally honest, with no filters and no sugarcoating. Now that honesty has him exposing the scary truth about Hulk Hogan. According to Lesnar, the so-called American hero isn't who fans thought he was. He's been dabbling in some of the dirtiest politics in WWE history. I've got all the details. Let's break it down. The Beast's silent condemnation. Lesnar, a man who famously declared,
I really don't like people. I'm sorry, I don't.
Would become the unwitting spokesperson for an entire generation of wrestlers who had grown tired of Hulk Hogan's stranglehold on professional wrestling. To understand the magnitude of what Lesnar represented, we must first examine the landscape he entered. Hulk Hogan's WWE career revolutionized wrestling, transforming it from regional territories into a global entertainment powerhouse during the 1980s Hulkamania era. His larger-than-life persona, complete with red and yellow gear, bandana, mustache, and catchphrases like "brother," made him a cultural icon. However, this same success bred widespread resentment among wrestlers, fans, and insiders who witnessed firsthand Hogan's ego-driven behavior that prioritized personal gain over the industry's health. The contrast between these two titans couldn't have been starker. While Hogan built his empire on charisma and political maneuvering, Lesnar represented something entirely different. Pure, unadulterated authenticity. Lesnar declared with characteristic bluntness. This wasn't the manufactured persona of a character designed to sell merchandise and manipulate crowds. This was a legitimate fighter who had conquered every mountain placed before him. Lesnar's achievements were undeniable. NCAA Division I heavyweight wrestling champion, youngest WWE champion in history at the time, and UFC heavyweight champion, a trifecta of accomplishments that no other performer in wrestling history could claim. More importantly, these weren't political victories handed down by backstage power brokers. They were earned through blood, sweat, and an almost inhuman level of physical dominance. The first public glimpse of tension between these wrestling philosophies came during a seemingly innocuous encounter in 2002. During their SmackDown match on August 8, 2002, Lesnar dominated Hogan in what was designed as a warm-up to build Lesnar's credibility before facing The Rock. But what transpired in that ring was more than just a passing of the torch. It was a symbolic dismantling of everything Hogan represented. Lesnar disrespected Hogan by shoving him across the ring and removing his bandana in the opening lockup. Despite Hogan's brief comebacks, including his trademark Hulk-up sequence, Lesnar won via technical submission with a bear hug, making Hogan pass out. The post-match beating was perhaps even more telling. Lesnar smashed Hogan's head with a steel chair, leaving him bloodied and smeared in his own blood as a message to The Rock. This wasn't simply a scripted wrestling match, it was a philosophical statement. Here was a legitimate athlete, someone who had proven himself in the most unforgiving arena of competitive sports, systematically dismantling the manufactured mythology of professional wrestling's most celebrated performer. The match was positively received by fans, with many noting Hogan's size making Lesnar look normal despite Lesnar's dominance. But the real revelation of Lesnar's true feelings toward Hogan wouldn't come until over a decade later, in a moment that crystallized years of industry frustration into a single devastating line. The date was August 11, 2014, and WWE was celebrating Hogan's 61st birthday on Monday Night Raw. The segment was designed as a feel-good nostalgia fest, with legends like Ric Flair, Roddy Piper, and Scott Hall in attendance. What followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as entertainment. As Lesnar and his advocate Paul Heyman interrupted the celebration to promote Lesnar's upcoming SummerSlam match against John Cena, something extraordinary happened. Lesnar circled the ring, staring down legends, until he stopped at Hogan and growled, "Party's over, Grandpa." Heyman, ever the opportunist, added insult to injury with his taunting, "What you gonna do, Hulkster?" The line was reportedly unscripted, added by Lesnar on the spot, which infuriated Hogan backstage. TMZ reported it as apparent real heat, with sources saying Hogan was legit furious over the disrespect. John Cena allegedly had to rush in and calm Hogan down, both on camera and behind the scenes. This moment represented far more than a simple insult. It was the culmination of decades of simmering resentment from wrestlers who had watched Hogan manipulate his way to the top, while more deserving performers were left behind. Lesnar's "Party's over, Grandpa" wasn't just an ad-lib. It was a generational declaration that the era of politics over performance was ending. To understand why this moment resonated so powerfully throughout the wrestling community, we must go through Hogan's controversial legacy. In 1986, before WrestleMania 2, Hogan reportedly informed Vince McMahon about Jesse Ventura's efforts to unionize wrestlers for better pay, health benefits, and protections. This betrayal thwarted improvements for the entire locker room, where Hogan earned more at WrestleMania 3 than everyone else combined, including Andre the Giant. The union betrayal was revealed under oath during McMahon's 1994 trial, leading to Jesse Ventura's departure from WWF and long-term resentment throughout the industry. For wrestlers who suffered without proper health care, retirement benefits, or basic protections, Hogan's actions weren't just selfish, they were actively harmful to their livelihoods and well-being. Lesnar's approach to the business stood in stark contrast to this political maneuvering. He declared with characteristic directness, "There were no empty promises of brotherhood, no manufactured emotions designed to manipulate audience sympathy." Lesnar offered something that had become increasingly rare in professional wrestling: honesty about his motivations and capabilities. This authenticity extended to every aspect of Lesnar's presentation. While Hogan built his career on catchphrases and superhero-like comebacks, Lesnar's interviews were studies in brutal honesty.
I'm not a man of many words, all right? That's why I have a guy that does all my talking for me.
He explained when asked about his psychological approach to opponents.
I can't answer that. I'm not out there to feel another man's emotion. I mean, that's ridiculous.
He continued, dismissing the manufactured drama that formed the backbone of sports entertainment. Perhaps most tellingly, Lesnar's physical presence in wrestling rings served as a constant reminder of what legitimate athletic achievement looked like. Joe Rogan and Hulk Hogan themselves discussed Lesnar's incredible physical attributes during a podcast appearance, with Rogan noting that Lesnar's NFL Combine numbers included a 4.7-second 40-yard dash at 283 pounds, a 35-inch vertical jump, and 30 repetitions of 225 pounds on the bench press.
Like, you don't understand what that guy did. Like, what that guy did is nothing short of insanity. Like, no one's ever done that before.
Rogan explained, referring to Lesnar's transition from professional wrestling to UFC heavyweight champion.
He's a monster, brother.
He's a monster.
He still is.
So he's like the biggest genetic freak maybe I've ever seen in the sport.
Hogan himself acknowledged. This acknowledgement from Hogan was particularly significant because it represented a rare moment of honesty about the gap between his own manufactured persona and Lesnar's legitimate athletic achievements. While Hogan built his career on the illusion of superhuman strength and endurance, Lesnar possessed actual superhuman physical capabilities that had been tested and proven in the most demanding competitive environments. The politics of destruction. The deeper we delve into the relationship between Brock Lesnar and Hulk Hogan, the more apparent it becomes that their conflict represented something far more significant than a simple generational clash. It was, at its core, a battle between two fundamentally different philosophies of what professional wrestling should be, and more importantly, what kind of person should be rewarded within its ecosystem. Hogan's approach to professional wrestling was characterized by what many wrestlers described as ruthless political maneuvering. His creative control clauses and backstage influence led to controversial decisions that prioritized his own interests over the industry's long-term health. The most egregious example might be the finger poke of doom incident in WCW in 1999, where Hogan and Kevin Nash staged a fake fight that mocked fans and contributed to WCW's eventual decline. But perhaps even more damaging was Hogan's pattern of refusing clean losses to younger talent, most notably seen in his botched match against Sting at WCW's Starrcade 1997, where he refused a clean loss and forced a restart after a supposed fast count. This wasn't just ego, it was a systematic undermining of wrestling's fundamental storytelling structure, where veterans are supposed to eventually pass the torch to the next generation. Steve Austin and Mick Foley both accused Hogan of refusing to elevate younger talent, with Austin specifically opting out of potential matches to avoid being undermined by Hogan's backstage machinations. These weren't isolated incidents, but part of a broader pattern that characterized Hogan's entire career. The contrast with Lesnar's approach couldn't have been more stark. When Lesnar returned to WE in 2012, he didn't demand creative control or special treatment. Instead, he did something that Hogan had rarely done throughout his career. He allowed himself to be positioned as a legitimate threat to the established order, regardless of politics. Lesnar declared, making it clear that he believed success should be determined by ability rather than political maneuvering. This philosophy extended to Lesnar's willingness to make others look legitimate in victory or defeat. His match with The Undertaker at WrestleMania 30, where he ended the streak, was a decision that prioritized long-term storytelling over short-term political considerations. Lesnar understood that his role was to elevate the entire product, even if it meant absorbing losses or making others look stronger. The political ramifications of this approach became apparent when we examine how different wrestlers responded to working with each man. The Undertaker, speaking in a shoot interview, expressed reservations about the NWO's return to WWE, specifically noting concerns about cancer in the locker room and egos that were too big.
And those guys came in with a huge rap on them. You know, I mean, I dealt with them all before in their previous stints here. So, I'd be lying if I told you I didn't have my reservations about them coming in.
The Undertaker explained. While The Undertaker was specifically discussing the NWO, the broader context of his comments reflected a widespread concern about wrestlers whose primary focus was personal advancement rather than collective success. This sentiment was particularly relevant when considering Hogan's influence during his various runs with different promotions. Lesnar's political approach was fundamentally different because it was based on demonstrated capability rather than manufactured leverage.
I'm a prize fighter, all right? I come to Monday Night Raw to promote fights.
He explained, emphasizing his view of wrestling as legitimate competition rather than predetermined entertainment. This perspective allowed him to work within the system while maintaining his authenticity and credibility. The broader wrestling community's response to these different approaches was telling. While Hogan often found himself embroiled in controversies and backstage tensions, Lesnar's reputation remained largely intact even among wrestlers who had reason to resent his success. Part of this was due to Lesnar's willingness to acknowledge the predetermined nature of wrestling while simultaneously bringing legitimate competitive credentials to his performances. But perhaps the most damaging revelation about Hogan's political approach came through his documented history of fabrications and lies that eroded trust throughout the industry. These included claims about wrestling 400 days a year due to time zones, being scouted by MLB, turning down the George Foreman grill endorsement, and partying with John Belushi after WrestleMania 2, despite Belushi dying in 1982. The most egregious example of Hogan's dishonesty in relation to Lesnar came through his repeated false claims about being the first wrestler to face Lesnar upon his 2012 WWE return after UFC. This was demonstrably false. Lesnar's first post-UFC WWE match was against John Cena at Extreme Rules 2012, and Hogan wasn't even employed by WWE at that time. Hogan repeated this claim multiple times, including on Joe Rogan's podcast in 2023 and in a 2025 TMZ interview, leading to widespread mockery on Reddit and social media. What made these lies particularly damaging was that they represented Hogan's ongoing need to insert himself into other wrestlers' accomplishments, even years after his active career had ended. Lesnar's response to such fabrications was characteristically direct. Rather than engaging in public disputes or attempting to correct the record through media appearances, he let his actions speak for themselves. He stated simply, allowing the contrast between his authentic approach and others' manufactured personas to speak for itself. This authenticity extended to Lesnar's business relationships within the wrestling industry. Unlike Hogan, who was notorious for using his influence to manipulate bookings and maintain his top position often at others' expense, Lesnar approached his career with what could best be described as professional pragmatism. He understood his value in the marketplace and negotiated accordingly, but without the destructive political maneuvering that characterized Hogan's approach. The most revealing aspect of Lesnar's political philosophy came through his willingness to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about the wrestling business. He explained during one interview, making it clear that he understood the line between entertainment and legitimate competition. He continued with characteristic bluntness. This willingness to acknowledge the brutal realities of professional wrestling stood in stark contrast to Hogan's tendency to mythologize his own experiences and accomplishments. While Hogan built his career on the illusion that his victories were the result of training, prayers, and vitamins, Lesnar was refreshingly honest about the combination of legitimate athletic ability, predetermined outcomes, and professional entertainment that defined modern wrestling. The political implications of this honesty cannot be overstated. By refusing to perpetuate the mythology that had sustained wrestlers like Hogan for decades, Lesnar was essentially arguing for a new model of professional wrestling, one based on legitimate athletic achievement and transparent business practices rather than manufactured drama and backstage manipulation. This philosophical difference became particularly apparent when examining how each man handled career transitions. Hogan's various departures from promotions were often accompanied by lawsuits, burned bridges, and lasting resentments. His time in WCW ended with the company's collapse, partially due to the political chaos he and others had created. His brief stint in TNA was marked by controversies and disputes that damaged relationships throughout the organization. Lesnar's transitions, by contrast, were characterized by mutual respect and maintained relationships. When he left WWE for UFC in 2004, he did so honestly and professionally. In his autobiography, Death Clutch, he was critical of WWE's system but avoided personal attacks on individuals, focusing instead on structural issues within the industry. His return in 2012 was welcomed by the company and fans alike because he had maintained his credibility and reputation during his absence. The final verdict. What Lesnar revealed about Hogan wasn't delivered through explosive interviews or tell-all books. It was communicated through something far more devastating: the simple act of existing as everything Hogan pretended to be, while possessing none of the character flaws that ultimately defined the Hulkster's legacy. The most damaging revelation in this entire saga might be Hogan's 2015 racism scandal, captured in leaked audio from a 2007 sex tape that surfaced during his lawsuit against Gawker Media. In the recording, Hogan repeatedly used racial slurs while expressing discomfort about his daughter Brooke dating a black man, saying things like, "I am a racist" to a point, and making other inflammatory comments. This led to immediate consequences. WWE terminated his contract on July 24, 2015, removed him from their website and Hall of Fame, and halted merchandise sales. The contrast between Hogan's public persona as an all-American hero promoting positive values and his private expressions of racial prejudice couldn't have been starker. Lesnar's response to such controversies was characteristically straightforward. He simply didn't create them.
Just who I am.
Talk to me about that. What do you mean you don't like people?
Stone Cold Steve Austin asked during a revealing interview.
Just don't like being around a bunch of people, and it's kind of ironic because I can go out in an arena full of 20,000 people and be all right with it, only because I feel like I'm in this dome and I'm protected.
Lesnar replied with characteristic honesty. This candid admission revealed something crucial about Lesnar's character. He was genuinely authentic, even when that authenticity might be uncomfortable or unflattering. Unlike Hogan, who crafted a public persona designed to maximize popularity and marketability, Lesnar presented himself exactly as he was, an intensely private, somewhat antisocial athlete who happened to be extraordinarily gifted at combat sports.
That's just who I am. That's why I live out in the middle of nowhere. That's why I got a 8-foot fence around my property. That's why I shut the gate when I come and go. That's just who I am.
Lesnar explained, painting a picture of someone who understood himself and lived according to his nature, rather than according to what others might expect or prefer. This authenticity extended to every aspect of Lesnar's professional presentation. When asked about his motivations for returning to WWE, he was brutally honest. He admitted without any attempt to soften the message or make it more palatable for family-friendly audiences. The implications of this honesty cannot be overstated when contrasted with Hogan's approach to public relations. Throughout his career, Hogan carefully cultivated an image as a role model for children, promoting messages about training, prayers, and vitamins, while privately engaging in behavior that directly contradicted these values. His admission to steroid use during McMahon's 1994 trial, after years of public denials, was just one example of the disconnect between his public persona and private reality. But perhaps the most telling revelation about the fundamental difference between these two men came through their respective approaches to success and failure. When Lesnar suffered his diverticulitis diagnosis and had to step away from UFC competition, he was honest about his health struggles and the impact they had on his career. He didn't attempt to minimize the significance of his condition or create elaborate narratives to protect his image. Hogan's response to setbacks was characteristically different. When faced with the racism scandal, he initially attempted to contextualize and minimize his comments, attributing them to his upbringing and pleading for forgiveness, while simultaneously trying to maintain his status within the industry. The pattern was consistent throughout his career: deflect, minimize, and attempt to control the narrative rather than accepting responsibility and genuine accountability. The wrestling community's response to these different approaches was telling. While many black wrestlers like Mark Henry, Booker T, and JTG expressed hurt and skepticism about Hogan's sincerity following his racism scandal, Lesnar maintained respect across racial and generational lines within the industry. This wasn't because Lesnar was particularly diplomatic or politically correct, quite the opposite. It was because his honesty, even when uncomfortable, was preferable to manufactured personas that could be revealed as hypocritical. Upon Hogan's death from cardiac arrest at age 71 in July 2025, media coverage consistently noted his complicated legacy, balancing his wrestling innovations against the numerous scandals that had turned public opinion against him. The fact that his obituaries focused as much on his controversies as his accomplishments spoke volumes about how his reputation had deteriorated over the decades. The broader implications of Lesnar's implicit critique of Hogan extend far beyond individual personalities. What Lesnar represented was a fundamental challenge to the entire system that had allowed figures like Hogan to thrive for so long. By demonstrating that legitimate athletic achievement and authentic personality could coexist with commercial success, Lesnar essentially proved that the political maneuvering and manufactured drama that characterized Hogan's career were unnecessary. This point was driven home during Lesnar's interactions with other wrestling legends. The Undertaker's comments about cancer in the locker room and his reservations about certain returning wrestlers reflected a broader concern within the industry about performers whose primary focus was personal advancement rather than collective success. While The Undertaker wasn't specifically targeting Hogan, his comments reflected the kind of thinking that Lesnar embodied, a preference for performers who elevated the entire product rather than just themselves.
The WWF locker room is completely different from what those guys have ever probably been around. That's a close-knit group of guys. You know what? They all out there to do business, and there's no time for all the BS.
The Undertaker explained, describing exactly the kind of professional environment where someone like Lesnar could thrive while political manipulators might struggle. The timing of these various revelations and interactions creates a compelling narrative about the evolution of professional wrestling itself. As the industry matured and became more transparent about its predetermined nature, performers like Hogan, who had built their careers on manufactured mythology, found themselves increasingly out of step with audience expectations and industry standards. Lesnar's career trajectory represented the future of professional wrestling, athletes who could legitimately compete at the highest levels while understanding and working within the entertainment aspects of the business.
Eat, sleep, kick it, repeat. That's what I do. And I happen to enjoy it, and I'm happy to be very good at it.
He explained with characteristic simplicity, distilling his entire philosophy into a few straightforward sentences. This approach allowed Lesnar to navigate controversies and challenges that might have destroyed careers built on more fragile foundations. When questions arose about his commitment to wrestling versus other pursuits, he was honest about his priorities and motivations, rather than attempting to craft elaborate explanations designed to protect his image. The final verdict on what Lesnar revealed about Hogan is perhaps more damning than any direct accusation could have been. By simply existing as a legitimate athlete who maintained his authenticity while achieving commercial success, Lesnar demonstrated that everything Hogan claimed to represent could be achieved without the lies, manipulation, and political maneuvering that defined the Hulkster's career. The fact that Hogan felt compelled to repeatedly lie about his interactions with Lesnar, claiming credit for matches that never happened and accomplishments he had no part in, only reinforced the impression of someone desperately trying to remain relevant in an industry that had moved beyond his particular brand of manufactured drama. The wrestling industry's response to both men's legacies provides the final piece of this puzzle. While Hogan's influence on wrestling's mainstream popularity cannot be denied, the long-term damage caused by his approach became increasingly apparent as the industry evolved. Multiple wrestlers, from Bret Hart to CM Punk, have gone on record criticizing Hogan's selfishness and political maneuvering, creating a historical record that stands in stark contrast to his carefully crafted public image. Lesnar's legacy, by comparison, remains largely untarnished by the kinds of personal and professional controversies that plagued Hogan throughout his career. Even wrestlers who might have philosophical disagreements with Lesnar's approach generally respect his authenticity and legitimate accomplishments. This difference in industry perception reflects the fundamental divide between performers who elevate the business and those who exploit it for personal gain. The symbolic power of Lesnar's 2014 "Party's over, Grandpa" comment resonates even more strongly when viewed through this lens. It wasn't just a wrestler insulting a legend. It was a generational changing of the guard, delivered by someone who represented everything the next era of professional wrestling could become. Where Hogan represented the old model of manufactured drama and political manipulation, Lesnar embodied a new paradigm of legitimate athletic achievement combined with transparent professionalism. Perhaps most significantly, Lesnar's approach demonstrated that commercial success didn't require the moral compromises that characterized much of Hogan's career. By maintaining his authenticity while achieving mainstream recognition, recognition, Lesnar proved that audiences could appreciate and support performers who refused to compromise their integrity for short-term gains. Lesnar's ongoing career continues to serve as a template for how modern professional wrestlers can navigate the complex demands of entertainment while maintaining their authenticity and integrity. His approach has influenced a generation of performers who understand that long-term success requires more than just political savvy and manufactured drama. The awful truth that Brock Lesnar revealed about Hulk Hogan wasn't contained in any single moment or statement. It was embodied in the living contrast between two fundamentally different approaches to success, integrity, and professional responsibility. Through his actions rather than his words, Lesnar demonstrated that everything Hogan claimed to represent could be achieved more effectively and sustainably through honesty, authenticity, and genuine athletic achievement.
You know what I think? I think it's just, it brings to light things that wouldn't normally be brought to light.
When Hulk Hogan passed away, the world was led to believe he had peacefully gone to rest. But apparently, his daughter Brooke believes there's more to it, and she's finally ready to expose everything. She's beginning to drop the names of some WWE wrestlers, and what she's revealing will leave you speechless. Let's break it down. The shocking revelation. The wrestling world was stunned when Hulk Hogan passed away from cardiac arrest on July 24, 2025 at the age of 71. But what should have been a simple mourning period quickly spiraled into something darker. Now, Brooke Hogan is reportedly speaking out, exposing wrestlers who may have played a role in her father's downfall, and she's not alone. Conspiracy theories have been flooding social media platforms like X and Reddit, with fans speculating that WWE figures may have had a hand in Hogan's death. The most explosive theory suggests that Vince McMahon offed Hogan because he knew too much about McMahon's sex trafficking scandal, with the timing of Hogan's death being suspiciously convenient amid McMahon's legal troubles. But what makes this theory particularly chilling is the documented history of real animosity between Hogan and wrestling's power brokers, stemming from decades of backstage manipulation and corporate betrayals that went far beyond typical wrestling politics. The conspiracy theories gained momentum when fans began connecting dots between Hogan's numerous feuds and the suspicious circumstances of his death. Social media users pointed to how computer nerds allegedly killed Scott Hall and Hulk Hogan after they spoke out, while others speculated about occult rituals involving three heroes or kings being arranged by WWE-linked groups. These theories, while seemingly outlandish, reflect a deep-seated distrust of WWE's official narrative and the company's history of covering up uncomfortable truths. Perhaps no feud was more bitter or personal than the one with Jesse the Body Ventura, whose hatred for Hogan transcended wrestling and entered the realm of real-world betrayal. When asked about the possibility of reconciling with Hogan, Ventura's response revealed the depth of his animosity.
Never.
What?
Can't trust him. I'm not friends with anyone I don't trust. And he's the one that ratted me to Vince when I tried to unionize.
This wasn't just wrestling drama. This was a real betrayal that destroyed lives and careers. Ventura discovered Hogan's treachery during a federal deposition when Vince McMahon was under oath, confirming that Hogan was the informant who sabotaged unionization efforts in 1986. Hogan literally sold out every wrestler in the business to protect his own financial interests, earning more than the entire locker room combined, while his colleagues struggled without basic protections. The ramifications of this betrayal extended far beyond personal animosity. It fundamentally altered the trajectory of workers' rights in professional wrestling, potentially costing wrestlers millions in lost benefits and protections over the decades that followed. But Ventura wasn't alone in his hatred. Bret Hart harbored deep resentment over Hogan's backstage politics, particularly the WrestleMania 9 incident, where Hogan used his creative control to steal what should have been Hart's moment. The situation became even more contentious when Hart confronted Hogan about dropping the title to him, leading to a heated backstage confrontation that would define their relationship for years to come.
Brett lost, and Brett told me to go in the ring and wrestle him, and I won the belt right after Brett wrestled him. And then the deal was for me to drop it back to Yokozuna. And then Brett got in my face. He goes, "Hey, you're supposed to drop the belt to me." I said, "No, I'm not."
This wasn't just creative differences. This was Hogan systematically using his influence to bury talent and protect his position at the top. Hart has accused Hogan of refusing to lose cleanly to him and lying about future plans, describing Hogan as someone who would say, "I'm not doing business with you," when asked to put other wrestlers over. The impact on Hart's career was significant. What should have been his defining moment as champion was stolen by Hogan's political maneuvering, forever altering the trajectory of one of wrestling's greatest technical wrestlers. The conspiracy conspiracies take an even darker turn when considering Randy Savage, whose relationship with Hogan deteriorated from close friendship into real violence. Their bond, which once seemed unbreakable, became one of wrestling's most bitter personal feuds. Hogan himself has been candid about how their friendship imploded over personal jealousy and misunderstandings.
It was Macho Man, and he lived on the beach here. We were together every single day, and then when he went through a divorce, he thought I had something to do with it. That turned out to be like an 8-year don't talk to each other.
But according to documented reports, this feud went far beyond not talking. Scott Steiner corroborated claims that Savage admitted to punching Hogan and giving him a black eye before WrestleMania 9, stemming from paranoia over Hogan's relationship with Miss Elizabeth. This wasn't kayfabe. This was real violence born from real hatred. The incident reportedly left Hogan scrambling to explain his injuries, ultimately claiming they resulted from a jet ski accident rather than admitting he'd been assaulted by his former best friend. Even more disturbing are the conspiracy theories involving The Undertaker, whose early career was nearly destroyed by Hogan's false accusations. Social media speculation suggests that Hogan falsely accused The Undertaker of injuring his neck after their 1991 Survivor Series match, claiming it caused paralysis fears when video footage later proved the move was executed perfectly. Some conspiracy theorists now wonder if The Undertaker, who was nearly destroyed early in his career by Hogan's lies, might have harbored resentment that lasted decades. The incident left The Undertaker fearing for his job and reputation, having to prove his innocence against false accusations from wrestling's biggest star. The relationship with Vince McMahon himself was equally fraught, characterized by power struggles and mutual mistrust that went far beyond typical business relationships. Their dynamic was complex, built on mutual need but undermined by constant tension over creative control and business decisions.
It was a love-hate relationship, He thought he knew best, I thought I knew best. So it was always a tug of war with me and him, but we seemed to click and make it work.
But this tug of war became something much more serious during the 1994 steroid trial, where Hogan testified against McMahon with immunity, admitting to shared steroid use while McMahon felt betrayed despite being acquitted. The tension from this betrayal never fully healed, and some conspiracy theorists suggest it may have played a role in the suspicious circumstances surrounding Hogan's death. McMahon's later comment that Hogan was not as big as he thinks he is revealed the underlying resentment that persisted between them for decades. Perhaps the most chilling theory involves claims that Rey Mysterio Jr. is allegedly a serial killer who murdered several wrestlers and has now been called in for questioning over the suspicious death of Hulk Hogan himself. While this sounds outlandish, it speaks to the deep suspicion that fans have about the wrestling industry's ability to cover up uncomfortable truths. The theory gained traction when fans began connecting the deaths of multiple wrestlers who had worked with Mysterio, creating a narrative of systematic elimination that, while unproven, reflects the paranoia surrounding wrestling's darker elements. The timing of Hogan's death also raised eyebrows among conspiracy theorists, particularly given claims by Bubba the Love Sponge that Hogan was on his deathbed and couldn't speak, which were vehemently denied by Hogan's team just days before his passing. The sudden shift from health denials to death announcements created a perfect storm of suspicion, with fans questioning whether WWE and Hogan's inner circle had been deliberately concealing the truth about his condition for business reasons. But if you think Hogan's enemies in wrestling were his only problem, you haven't seen anything yet, because his personal scandals and shady behavior created an entirely different set of enemies who may have had even more reason to want him gone. The dark legacy, scandals, secrets, and shady dealings. While conspiracy theories swirl around Hogan's death and his wrestling enemies, the truth is that Terry Bollea was involved in real-world scandals that destroyed relationships, ended careers, and created a legacy of controversy that would follow him to his grave. The most devastating revelation came in 2015, when leaked audio from a 2007 sex tape revealed Hogan using racial slurs repeatedly while discussing his daughter Brooke's dating life. But what made the scandal particularly explosive wasn't just the racism, it was the context in which these words were spoken, revealing a man whose private thoughts were diametrically opposed to his public persona. The leaked audio didn't just contain racial slurs, it revealed a pattern of thinking that suggested deep-seated prejudice had been carefully hidden for decades behind the wholesome Hulkamania facade. The racist remarks weren't limited to a single incident either. Additional audio surfaced revealing Hogan's concerns about being reincarnated as a black person due to karma following his son Nick's car accident, demonstrating what some described as advanced racism. that went far beyond casual prejudice. These revelations painted a picture of a man whose worldview was fundamentally at odds with the values he publicly espoused, creating enemies not just among wrestling fans, but within entire communities who had once looked up to him as a role model. When finally confronted about his racist remarks, Hogan's attempts at explanation only made the situation worse, revealing the depths of his personal crisis and the extent to which his private behavior contradicted his public image.
I was at the lowest point of my life. My personal life was destroyed. I was very mad at my daughter. I was upset over a situation that happened between her and her boyfriend, and I had no idea I was being taped. I was to the point where I wanted to kill myself.
But his explanations only made things worse, as he attempted to justify his racist language by blaming his environment and upbringing. His response revealed not just the prejudice, but also a complete lack of understanding about why his words were so damaging.
Are you a racist?
No, I'm not. I'm not a racist. But a lot of people need to realize that you inherit things from your environment. And where I grew up was South Tampa, Port Tampa, and it was a really rough neighborhood, very low income. And all my friends, we greeted each other saying that word.
This wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a window into decades of ingrained prejudice that had been carefully hidden behind the Hulkamania facade. The fallout was swift and devastating, with WWE terminating his contract and removing him from their Hall of Fame, essentially erasing him from wrestling history until his controversial reinstatement in 2018. The impact extended beyond WWE, with sponsors dropping him and venues canceling appearances, creating financial consequences that lasted for years. But the racism scandal was just the tip of the iceberg. The 2007 sex tape that exposed his racist views also revealed another layer of betrayal, this time involving his closest friend, Bubba the Love Sponge. The betrayal cut particularly deep because it came from someone Hogan had trusted implicitly, someone who had been given access to his most private moments.
They're pointing to a very good friend of mine, Bubba the Love Sponge, and to this day, I would have to see the tape to believe that, and I haven't seen the tape because they say there's a verbal reference and a on-camera appearance after I'm gone that, puts him in the hot seat, but, he's been such a close friend.
The betrayal by Bubba the Love Sponge wasn't just personal. It was a violation of trust that would have legal and financial ramifications for years to come. The subsequent lawsuit against Gawker Media resulted in a $140 million judgment, later settled for $31 million, but the damage to relationships and reputation was irreversible. The case, notably funded by billionaire Peter Thiel due to his own grievances with Gawker, became a landmark privacy rights case that ultimately bankrupted the media outlet, but it also exposed Hogan to years of public humiliation and legal scrutiny. Perhaps even more damaging than his racist remarks or sex tape was his systematic use of steroids, which he was forced to admit during the 1994 federal trial against Vince McMahon. This wasn't just about personal drug use. This was about the culture of deception and performance enhancement. This wasn't just about personal drug use. This was about the culture of deception and performance enhancement that Hogan had helped create and perpetuate throughout the wrestling industry. His admission of using anabolic steroids for nearly 14 years, while publicly promoting a clean, wholesome image, revealed a level of hypocrisy that shocked even his most dedicated fans. The steroid scandal became even more personal when we consider its long-term impact on his health and family relationships. What began as performance enhancement evolved into a dangerous dependency that nearly cost him his life. The pharmaceutical journey that followed his wrestling career revealed a man struggling with addiction on multiple fronts.
And the thing that stopped me, the thing that shut me down completely, where I said enough's enough, is when they hit me with the fentanyl stuff. They almost killed me with that stuff. So that's when I said, I'm done.
This wasn't just about recreational drug use. This was about a man who had become so dependent on performance-enhancing and pain-killing substances that it nearly cost him his life. The extent of his pharmaceutical dependency was truly shocking, revealing a healthcare system that had failed him and a personal struggle that went far beyond anything his fans could have imagined.
And they would give me these 280 fentanyl pills, and you'd have to stuff them under your gums in the morning and then at night. And they were giving me 15 of these 1,500 milligram lollipop things to eat during the day. That's how drugged up they had me.
The pharmaceutical dependency created a vicious cycle of pain, medication, and increasingly dangerous substances that culminated in near-death experiences and hallucinations. His pharmacist reportedly said he had never seen anybody on so much fentanyl and still be alive, with the prescription costing $2,000 every 2 days, highlighting both the financial and physical toll of his addiction. The withdrawal process he described was harrowing, involving weeks of isolation, massive weight loss, and disturbing hallucinations that demonstrated just how close he had come to losing everything. Perhaps the most heartbreaking scandal was the one involving his son Nick. In 2007, Nick's reckless driving caused a car accident that left his friend, John Graziano, with permanent brain damage.
It's just something that I pray to God every day for the strength to deal with, because it's hard. There's days where I can't even get out of bed.
What should have been a moment of deep remorse instead exposed a darker side of the Hogan family. Recorded jail conversations surfaced, revealing Nick's shocking lack of empathy and cruel comments about the victim and his family. The incident shattered not only their lives, but also the illusion of a perfect family, unveiling a deep-seated dysfunction that would haunt them for years to come. Hogan made insensitive comments about the accident, suggesting it might be part of God's plan. These comments, combined with the family's wealth and celebrity status, created a public relations nightmare that further damaged Hogan's reputation as a family man and role model. The Graziano family's lawsuit and the subsequent settlement of approximately $1.5 million only highlighted the lasting consequences of the tragedy and the family's inability to handle it with appropriate sensitivity. The pattern of lies and exaggerations that defined Hogan's public persona became increasingly apparent as stories emerged about his tendency to fabricate details about his life and career. From claiming he wrestled 400 days in a year to suggesting he was scouted by major bands like Metallica, Hogan's relationship with the truth became a running joke among wrestling fans and peers, further eroding his credibility on all matters. These fabrications weren't harmless embellishments. They were systematic deceptions that called into question everything he had ever said publicly. Even his political involvement became controversial, particularly his vocal support for Donald Trump, an appearance at the 2024 Republican National Convention. His political rhetoric was inflammatory and divisive, alienating fans who had once viewed him as a unifying figure in American popular culture.
When I look out and I see all the real Americans, I think about how Donald Trump, his family was compromised. When I look out there and I see Donald Trump, I think about how his business was compromised. But what happened last week when they took a shot at my hero and they tried to kill the next president of the United States? Enough was enough, and I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
This political involvement alienated many fans and created yet another category of people who had reasons to dislike or distrust Hogan. The pattern was clear. Throughout his life, Terry Bollea had consistently made choices that prioritized his own interests over loyalty, truth, or basic human decency. But while the wrestling world and general public were dealing with Hogan's scandals and controversies, there was one person who was witnessing it all from the inside, suffering through the consequences of being related to such a polarizing figure. The ultimate betrayal. After decades of watching her father destroy relationships, betray colleagues, and create scandal after scandal, Brooke Hogan finally reached her breaking point. But what she revealed about life inside the Hogan household wasn't just family drama. It was a damning indictment of a man whose private behavior was even worse than his public controversies, and whose treatment of his own family reveals the true character behind the Hulkamania facade. The first crack in the family's public image came during the highly publicized divorce between Hulk and Linda Hogan in 2009. But while the world saw allegations of infidelity and financial disputes, what was happening behind closed doors was far more sinister. Linda's 2011 memoir detailed extensive allegations of physical abuse by Hogan, including choking her, throwing lamps, and holding her down with hands around her throat during arguments, painting a picture of a household ruled by fear and intimidation. The divorce proceedings revealed a level of financial complexity that suggested years of hidden assets and strategic maneuvering. Linda ultimately received 70% of the couple's liquid assets, 40% ownership of Hulk's companies, and a $3 million property settlement. But the true cost was the destruction of family relationships that would never recover. The settlement left Hulk with approximately $2.98 million in liquid assets, and he later admitted the divorce brought him to the brink of bankruptcy, highlighting how his personal failures had direct financial consequences. But it wasn't until March 2025 that the full extent of the family's dysfunction became public, when Brooke Hogan broke her silence with shocking allegations revelations that would forever change how we view wrestling's most famous family. In a lengthy Instagram post, Brooke revealed that she had been subjected to extremely verbal and mental abuse since childhood that frequently turned physical, describing a pattern of manipulation and exploitation that had lasted for decades. What made Brooke's allegations even more devastating was her revelation that she had been used as a pawn or buffer in family conflicts, and was often manipulated to defend her parents' behavior publicly, including during Hulk's 2015 racist remarks controversy. This manipulation extended far beyond family matters and into the very scandals that would define her father's legacy. She was forced to serve as the family's public defender while privately suffering from the very behavior she was asked to excuse. The psychological impact of this manipulation cannot be overstated. Brooke described being expected to forgive massive blows to her career and personal life caused by her parents' behavior, while simultaneously being asked to defend them publicly. Her decision to go no contact with both parents was based on separate reasons for each, emphasizing that the abuse came from multiple sources within the household. This wasn't just about one parent versus another, it was about a toxic family system that had failed to protect its most vulnerable member. The abuse allegations become even more significant when we hear from Brooke herself about the psychological toll of growing up in such a toxic environment. Her reflections on the family's public struggles reveal someone who had been forced to mature far beyond her years while dealing with constant media scrutiny and family dysfunction.
You know, our family's been through a lot of crap, and I will say my dad, despite, it's hard to, have all your skeletons, pulled out of your closet and just waved in front of everybody's face and humiliated the world.
But what's particularly telling is how Brooke was expected to maintain loyalty despite witnessing her father's worst behavior. The conflict between her natural love for her family and her growing awareness of their toxic behavior created an impossible situation that she struggled with for years.
It's hard, and everybody was like, oh, Brooke stands by her dad and this and that, and it's like, first of all, that's who I am. I'm loyal. Like, if you're honest with me, it doesn't matter. I will love you.
This loyalty was systematically exploited, with Brooke being forced to serve as the family's public defender while privately suffering from the very behavior she was asked to excuse. The psychological impact of this manipulation cannot be overstated. Being forced to defend the indefensible while being victimized by the same person creates a level of trauma that can last for generations. Brooke specifically mentioned being expected to defend her father during his racist remarks scandal, only to later realize she had been misled about the true nature of his comments and character. The family's dysfunction extended beyond just verbal and emotional abuse to include financial exploitation and career sabotage. Brooke revealed that she was often told that others were benefiting financially from her suffering and embarrassment, suggesting that her family's drama was being monetized in ways that directly harmed her well-being. This commercialization of family trauma added another layer of exploitation to an already toxic situation, making it clear that even her pain was seen as a potential revenue stream. The full extent of the family's medical and personal struggles became apparent when Brooke discussed her father's declining health and the impact it had on their relationship. Her detailed knowledge of his medical procedures reveals someone who, despite the abuse, had continued to care about his well-being even as their relationship deteriorated.
We counted how many surgeries he's had in the last 10 years, and I think we're at 25.
Oh, God.
So he's had both shoulders scoped, and he had his whole bicep and his bursac and his everything tied up in his shoulder like last year. That was a disaster. He got MRSA, and it was like a big thing, so we had to go back and undo it.
This physical deterioration, combined with his substance abuse issues and the stress of constant scandals, created a perfect storm that would ultimately contribute to his death in July 2025. But what makes the situation even more tragic is that Brooke was notably absent from WWE's tribute events following her father's death, later revealing that she hadn't been invited. The exclusion from her father's memorial events speaks to the deep rifts that had formed not just within the Hogan family, but between the family and the wrestling establishment. Her exclusion from WWE's memorial events wasn't just an oversight, it was a deliberate decision that highlighted how completely she had been ostracized from her father's professional legacy. The fact that her brother Nick attended while she was excluded suggests that WWE made specific choices about which family members were acceptable for their narrative and which were not. This exclusion during a time of grief added another layer of pain to an already traumatic situation. The final conversation between Brooke and her father, which took place in September 2023, reveals the ultimate tragedy of their relationship. Despite years of estrangement and abuse allegations, Brooke still told him she loved him, and he apologized, though the specifics of the apology remain unclear. This interaction occurred just 2 weeks before Hulk's wedding to Sky Daily, which Brooke did not attend, highlighting their continued estrangement even in his final years. The circumstances surrounding this final conversation are particularly telling. Brooke had reached out to express concern about his health and urge him to slow down, but he reportedly responded coldly and showed little interest in meeting her children. This interaction perfectly exemplifies the pattern of their relationship, Brooke continuing to care despite the abuse, while Hulk remained emotionally unavailable and self-centered, even in what would become their final exchange. Heard of never speaking ill of the dead? Well, it's definitely not in Brooke's books. Hulk Hogan's daughter has just revealed many things about the wrestler right after his body turned cold.
He's capable of anything. Let's just put it that way.
Some of what Hulk allegedly did was so bad, Brooke's refusing to take a cent from his inheritance. Let's get into it. Brooke Hogan's shocking revelations about her father's dark side. The immortal Hulk. Hogan, the man who body-slammed Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3, the American hero who trained, said his prayers and ate his vitamins, has been exposed by the one person who knew him best, his own flesh and blood. The truth started spilling out like blood from a busted open forehead when Linda Hogan posted emotional videos on Instagram in March 2025, blaming Hulk for the family's dysfunction. But what came next was a verbal suplex that nobody saw coming. Brooke didn't just respond, she delivered a shoot promo that would make Stone Cold Steve Austin's Austin 316 speech look tame. In a devastating Instagram post that went more viral than any wrestling clip, Brooke revealed she had experienced extremely verbal and mental abuse since childhood that would frequently turn physical. This wasn't a work, brothers. This was a shoot, and it cut deeper than any razor wire or steel chair to the skull. The daughter of the man who preached about training, prayers, and vitamins was telling the world that her own father had been delivering emotional and physical punishment behind closed doors for decades. But here's where it gets more twisted than a ladder match gone wrong. Brooke didn't stop there. She dropped another bombshell that would make even the most hardcore wrestling fans question everything they thought they knew about their hero. She revealed that she had been asked to defend poor behavior to the public and have done so out of love, only to find out she was misinformed, manipulated, and lied to. During one of her trips to a restaurant, she encountered fans who judged her for being out at such a time. In her words,
everybody was like, "Are you Brooke Hogan? What are you doing here?" And I'm like, I just am normal and I just need some social interaction and to feel normal and to feel alive, so sorry.
Picture this. While Hulk was making millions and the crowd was chanting Hulkamania, his own daughter was being used as a human shield to protect his reputation from the scandals that would eventually destroy his legacy.
You know, when your dad had his big scandal, you know, was that hard for you to sit back and be a daughter and watch that go down? Because I got to imagine that's really painful for you at that time.
It's hard, and you know, everybody was like, "Oh, Brooke stands by her dad," and this and that. And it's
However, the most devastating revelation came when Brooke explained what it was like being the daughter of wrestling's biggest icon. She watched others benefit financially off my suffering and embarrassment caused by their selfish behavior, while it caused my life to crumble. Think about that for a minute, wrestling fans. While Hulk Hogan was making millions from his wrestling career, movies, and reality TV shows, his own daughter was being sacrificed on the altar of his fame and fortune. Now let's talk about one of the most shocking aspects of this family drama, Hulk Hogan's racist attitudes that tore his relationship with Brooke apart like a steel cage being ripped to shreds. The 2015 racism scandal wasn't just about some leaked audio, it was about a father who couldn't accept his daughter's choices in life. The leaked audio transcript from a 2007 sex tape revealed Hogan using racial slurs, including the N-word, while discussing Brooke's dating life, specifically expressing discomfort about her reportedly dating a black man. But here's what really happened behind the scenes, and this is where it gets more personal than any Family Feud storyline you've ever seen on television. Hogan reportedly called Brooke a for dating a black man and made it clear that he disapproved of her relationship choices based purely on race. This wasn't just locker room talk, brothers. This was a father rejecting his daughter's happiness because of the color of her boyfriend's skin.
I'm not a double standard kind of guy. I'm racist to a point.
The impact of this racism went beyond just words. It poisoned the well of their relationship permanently. Brooke later cited the scandal as devastating her career and forcing her to defend poor behavior publicly, contributing to her life crumbling. Imagine being forced to defend your father's racist comments on national television while knowing that those same racist attitudes were directed at your personal relationships. It's like being put in a submission hold that you can't tap out of. The family dysfunction reached its breaking point when it came time for one of the most important moments in any daughter's life, her wedding day. This is where Hulk Hogan proved that his racist attitudes weren't just talk. They had real, devastating consequences for his relationship with Brooke. Brooke married Stephen Oleksy in a private Orlando ceremony in June 2022, without informing her parents. But here's the real kicker that would make even the most hardened wrestling fans feel sympathy for Brooke. According to radio host Bubba the Love Sponge, Brooke asked her father to walk her down the aisle, but he refused, saying, "Sorry, I don't do weddings anymore." This wasn't just a scheduling conflict or a simple family disagreement. This came amid escalating tensions, and Brooke did not attend Hogan's September 2023 wedding to Sky Daily, citing the need to protect her heart. The father-daughter relationship had deteriorated to the point where they couldn't even celebrate each other's happiness. The estrangement between Hulk and Brooke became complete sometime around September 2023, and what led to this final break reads like the most heartbreaking storyline you've never seen on WWE television. Brooke described it as stemming from private phone calls no one will ever hear, respectful disagreements, and a thick veil around Hogan that she couldn't penetrate. But here's where the story gets even more tragic. Brooke had moved to Florida to support Hogan during his health crises, offering to be his life raft amid his surgeries and business problems. Picture this: a daughter who had been abused and manipulated for years, still trying to be there for her father in his time of need. But instead of gratitude, Hogan shut her out completely. Brooke explained that, then all of a sudden, he didn't want me at surgeries. Everything started getting covered in a thick veil. It was like there was a force field around him that I couldn't get through. The man who had spent decades in the wrestling business building relationships and working with people couldn't even maintain a relationship with his own daughter, who was trying to help him through his darkest hours. The final nail in the coffin of their relationship came with a decision that would shock even the most cynical wrestling fans. In 2023, Brooke requested removal from Hogan's will to avoid contentious battles over his estate and due to distrust of his inner circle, whom she believed were exploiting him. Think about that for a moment. A daughter so disgusted with her father's behavior and the people around him that she willingly gave up what could have been millions of dollars. This wasn't about money, brothers. This was about dignity, respect, and self-preservation. Brooke's husband, Stephen Oleksy, confirmed this was to preserve her peace of mind and dignity, influenced by past hurts like the 2015 scandal. When you're willing to walk away from generational wealth because staying connected to it would destroy your soul, that tells you everything you need to know about how toxic that relationship had become. Oleksy later explained that money does not represent accomplishments in the ring. The majority of it came at the expense of my wife's dignity. He was referring to how much of Hogan's fortune came from the Gawker lawsuit settlement, which was connected to the sex tape that contained the racist comments about Brooke and her relationships. But the most heartbreaking part of this entire story is what happened during Brooke's most vulnerable moment. Brooke's twins were born in January 2025, and she nearly died during childbirth, but received no support from Hogan. Picture that scene: a daughter fighting for her life while bringing new life into the world, and her father, the man who claimed to be a real American hero, was nowhere to be found. The estrangement was so complete that Brooke's parents weren't even informed about the birth of their grandchildren. These children will grow up never knowing their grandfather, not because he died before they were born, but because their mother had to protect them from the same toxic environment that had destroyed her own childhood. Even after Hogan's death in July 2025, the pain and complexity of their relationship continued to haunt Brooke. In her tribute post, she tried to find some peace and closure, but the hurt was still evident. She described their bond as never broken, even in his final moments, and named her daughter Molly after him, showing that despite everything, some part of her still loved the man who had given her life, even as he had spent years systematically destroying it. From golden years to devastating scandals, the story of how Hulk Hogan destroyed his daughter's life didn't start with their estrangement or the racist comments that tore their family apart. Let's take a trip back to the early days, brothers, when Terry Gene Bollea was just a young father trying to raise his children while building the Hulk Hogan empire. During Brooke's childhood, the family maintained a relatively grounded suburban existence in Clearwater, Florida, where Brooke attended Clearwater Central Catholic High School. But even in these early years, the seeds of dysfunction were being planted. Hulk's career kept him on the road constantly, instantly, creating an environment where normal father-daughter bonding was replaced by the pressure cooker atmosphere of professional wrestling celebrity. Brooke graduated high school at age 16, highlighting her drive and the family's emphasis on education and achievement amid Hulk's celebrity status. But even this achievement was overshadowed by the constant pressure of living up to the Hogan name and dealing with the public scrutiny that came with being Hulk Hogan's daughter. Then came the moment that would change everything, the decision to put their family life on display for the whole world to see. Hogan Knows Best premiered on VH1 on July 10, 2005, and ran until October 21, 2007, spanning 4 seasons and 43 episodes. The show served as a spoof of the 1950s sitcom Father Knows Best, chronicling the everyday life of the Hogan family in their Clearwater Beach home. On the surface, the show presented the perfect family dynamic. The cast included Hulk as the protective patriarch, Linda as the more lenient mother, teenage Brooke pursuing pop music, and younger brother Nick into motorsports and wrestling. The show was a massive success, becoming VH1's highest-rated series at the time, and it seemed to show America the real Hulk Hogan, a devoted family man trying to balance his larger-than-life persona with the everyday challenges of raising teenagers. But here's what the cameras didn't show, and what Brooke would later reveal in her devastating Instagram posts. The show was lightly scripted, with scenes often reshot for effect, meaning that even their reality was being manipulated for entertainment value. The family's real dynamics were being shaped and distorted by the demands of television production, creating an artificial environment where genuine relationships took a back seat to ratings and storylines. The series heavily featured Hulk and Brooke's father-daughter dynamic, portraying it as playful yet stressful, with Hulk's overprotectiveness as a central theme. At 17, when the show premiered, Brooke was shown as an ambitious teen chasing a music career. During filming, she signed a $1.3 million record deal and released her debut album Undiscovered in 2006, with the lead single About Us premiering on the season 2 finale. But here's where Hulk's controlling nature really began to show its ugly face. The show captured episodes like Brooke's First Date and Brooke's Dating Game, where Hogan was shown spying on dates or vetting boyfriends, often with humorous schemes. What seemed funny and endearing to television audiences was actually the documentation of a father exerting unhealthy control over his daughter's personal life. The most disturbing example of this control was when Hulk installed a GPS tracker in Brooke's car to monitor her, and even remotely disable the engine. Think about that for a moment, wrestling fans. This wasn't just protective parenting, this was surveillance and control that would be considered inappropriate in any healthy relationship. The man who preached about American values was essentially treating his teenage daughter like a prisoner. The show also highlighted their playful interactions, with Brooke nicknamed Brooke Teeny by her dad, and their bond included lighthearted moments like family competitions. But even these seemingly sweet moments were tainted by the underlying dynamic of control and manipulation that was happening behind the scenes. Linda often mediated between father and daughter, adding balance to their interactions. But this mediation was necessary because of the tension that Hulk's controlling behavior was creating. What should have been a normal father-daughter relationship required constant intervention from a third party just to function. Linda later admitted on The Howard Stern Show in 2006 that cameras caused temporary family rifts, revealing that even during what seemed like their happiest period, the pressure of maintaining their public image was already tearing the family apart from the inside. The show ended in 2007, officially due to Hulk and Linda's divorce proceedings, but the damage to the family dynamic had already been done.
I don't know. It just doesn't get better. I do love living alone. I don't ever want to be married again after him. Trust me. But I love my animals, and my lawyers were in cahoots with his lawyers. They had everything set up where they were cashing in on me. Yeah.
The portrayal boosted Brooke's career, but foreshadowed later strains as the family's public image unraveled post-show with the 2007 divorce and scandals. What had seemed like a successful family reality show was actually the documentation of a family in the early stages of destruction. The first major blow came in 2007 when Hulk and Linda's marriage began to crumble amid allegations of infidelity. The perfect family that America had fallen in love with was revealed to be built on lies, manipulation, and betrayal. The scandal that would would ultimately define Hulk Hogan's legacy and completely destroy his relationship with Brooke began in 2012, but its roots went back to 2007. In October 2012, Gawker Media published a 1-minute, 41-second clip of a 2007 sex tape featuring Hogan and Heather Clem, the then wife of his friend, radio personality Bubba the Love Sponge Clem. The tape was secretly recorded without Hogan's knowledge or consent, capturing 3 separate sexual encounters. But the real devastation came in July 2015, when the racist content of those tapes was revealed to the world. Leaked audio transcript from the sex tape surfaced, revealing Hogan using racial slurs, including the N-word, during a private conversation about his daughter Brooke's dating life. The specific comments were even more shocking than the general racism. Hogan was recorded expressing discomfort about Brooke reportedly dating a black man, specifically referencing Brooke's then-boyfriend, producer Yannick Stack Dollar Barker.
The thing is, now they start doing these nasty emails, so some will arrive at a relationship. And so now Brooke doesn't want to talk to anybody.
Think about what this meant for Brooke, brothers. Her own father was caught on tape using the most vile racist language while discussing her personal relationships. He added concerns about Brooke's music career being impacted by associating with black artists, showing that his racism wasn't just personal. He was willing to sabotage his daughter's career prospects because of his own bigoted views. The fallout was immediate and devastating. On July 24, 2015, WWE terminated Hogan's contract and removed him from their website and Hall of Fame, with the company stating they were committed to embracing and celebrating individuals from all backgrounds. Hogan lost endorsement deals and was removed as a judge on WWE's Tough Enough, and his public appearances were severely limited. But the real victim in all of this wasn't Hulk Hogan. It was Brooke, who found herself in an impossible position. Brooke initially defended her father in a 2015 interview, stating that's not who he is, but later cited the scandal as devastating her career and forcing her to defend poor behavior publicly. The 2015 scandal wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of behavior that had been destroying Brooke's life for years. Additional recordings surfaced, including jailhouse phone calls from 2008 between Hogan and his son Nick, who was serving time for a car accident, where Hogan used the N-word again, referring to Nick's black cellmates, showing that this wasn't just a one-time mistake, but a consistent pattern of racist thinking. But the scandals didn't stop there. Hulk's personal life continued to provide ammunition that would further destroy his relationship with his daughter. His marriage to Jennifer McDaniel from 2010 to 2021 was overshadowed by the sex tape scandal and its legal aftermath, showing Brooke that her father's pattern of destructive behavior wasn't changing. The 2009 divorce from Linda had been finalized after she filed in 2007, citing infidelity with Christian Plant, one of Brooke's close friends. Think about the betrayal Brooke must have felt. Not only was her father cheating on her mother, but he was doing it with someone from her own inner circle, someone she trusted. Another scandal that impacted the family was Nick's 2007 imprisonment for 8 months following a car accident that permanently injured his friend John Graziano. The incident was covered on Hogan Knows Best, adding another layer of public shame and family dysfunction that Brooke had to navigate. Throughout all of these scandals, Brooke was expected to be the dutiful daughter, defending her father publicly, while privately dealing with the emotional devastation of watching her family's reputation crumble. She was repeatedly asked to defend poor behavior to the public and have done so out of love, only to find she was misinformed, manipulated, and lied to. But even as their relationship crumbled under the weight of these scandals, there was still more devastation to come. The final chapter of Hulk Hogan's life would bring new revelations about his character, his attempts at redemption, and the ultimate legacy he would leave behind. The final bell and a complex legacy. The final chapter of Hulk Hogan's life reads like the most complex wrestling storyline ever written, a tale of attempted redemption, spiritual awakening, and ultimate tragedy that would leave wrestling fans questioning everything they thought they knew about one of the industry's biggest icons. Hogan's health had deteriorated significantly in the years leading up to his death, largely due to the physical demands of his wrestling career, with over 25 surgeries in the last decade of his life.
I think my body pretty much shut down on me, and I ended up having like 25 surgeries in the last 10 years.
The body that had once slammed Andre the Giant was now failing him, requiring multiple back surgeries, knee and hip replacements, and constant medical intervention. But it wasn't just his physical health that was crumbling. In the months before his death, there were significant rumors and hospitalizations that highlighted his declining condition. On June 18, 2025, radio host Bubba the Love Sponge claimed Hogan was in critical condition, sparking rumors he was on his deathbed. While his representatives denied these claims, the writing was on the wall. all, the immortal Hulk Hogan was becoming increasingly mortal with each passing day. The final months of Hogan's life were marked by a desperate attempt to find peace and redemption through faith. On December 20th, 2023, Hulk Hogan and his wife, Sky Daly Hogan, were baptized at Indian Rocks Baptist Church in Largo, Florida.
I just get tired of crashing and burning. I get tired of making mistakes and getting up and moving forward. I get tired of getting so many scars on me. And, I got to a point in my life before I met Sky, before I had the baptism, where I'd had enough. I was sick and tired of myself.
Hogan shared the moment on social media, writing what would become some of his most profound words. Total surrender and dedication to Jesus is the greatest day of my life. No worries, no hate, no judgment, only love. For many wrestling fans, his baptism represented hope. Hope that the man who had made so many mistakes might finally find peace and redemption. Hogan described the baptism as a major pivot in his life, emphasizing his commitment to living faithfully. In an April 2023 social media post, he had written about accepting Christ as his Savior at 14 years old, saying that now that he was one with God, he was ready to slam any giant of any size through the power of my Lord and Savior. But here's the tragic reality, brothers. While Hulk Hogan was finding his faith and trying to make peace with his Creator, he was still unable to make peace with his own daughter. The estrangement with Brooke continued right up until his death, showing that sometimes the damage we do to those we love most is simply too great to repair, even with divine intervention. The end came suddenly, as it often does for wrestling legends who have pushed their bodies beyond human limits for decades. On July 24, 2025, emergency responders were dispatched to Hulk Hogan's home in Clearwater, Florida, following a call reporting a cardiac arrest at 9:51 a.m. The man who had entertained millions around the world was treated by rescue crews before being transported to Morton Plant Hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 11:17 a.m. The 911 call was described as chilling and disturbing, with leaked CPR footage showing the desperation of the moment as paramedics worked frantically to save the wrestling icon. The audio clip captured the dispatcher's calm but urgent tone as they coordinated the emergency response, but it was too late. The Hulkster had fought his final match. The final days of Hogan's life were emotionally turbulent, dominated by the estrangement from Brooke that had persisted for years. Insiders revealed his final moments were emotional and marked by deathbed heartbreak, particularly over unresolved family tensions. The man who had conquered every opponent in the ring had been defeated by his inability to repair the most important relationship in his life. Hogan was heartbroken and hopeful for reconciliation with Brooke, but she had publicly alluded to verbal and mental abuse in her childhood. Tragedy is that in their last conversation before his death, there might have been a glimmer of hope. Reports suggest that Brooke told him she loved him, but it was too little, too late to heal decades of damage. Following Hogan's death, Brooke broke her silence once more with a tribute that was both heartbreaking and revelatory. On July 29, 2025, she posted an emotional Instagram tribute that showed the complex mix of love and pain that defined their relationship. She affirmed their bond, saying, "My dad's blood runs through my veins, his eyes shine through my children, and our bond is never broken, not even in his final moments." But even in this tribute, the pain was evident. Brooke explained how she had moved to Florida to support Hulk through approximately 25 surgeries, offering to be his life raft amid personal and business problems. She had tried to be there for her father during his darkest hours, despite everything he had put her through. The most heartbreaking part of her tribute revealed how Hogan had ultimately rejected even her attempts to help. She described how, then all of a sudden, he didn't want me at surgeries. Everything started getting covered in a thick veil. It was like there was a force field around him that I couldn't get through. Even when she was trying to save their relationship, her father was pushing her away. After respectful disagreements, she had to step away to protect my heart in the last 2 years, around September 2023. The daughter who had tried everything to maintain a relationship with her father finally had to choose her own mental health and well-being over continuing to subject herself to his toxic behavior. Despite everything, Brooke's tribute showed that part of her still loved the man who had given her life, even as he had spent years systematically destroying it. She found peace in knowing I did everything I could. He knew I would run through a burning building for him, and in many ways, along the path of life I did. The final twist in this tragic story came with the revelation of Hogan's will and Brooke's complete removal from it. In 2023, Brooke had requested removal from Hogan's Hogan's will to avoid contentious battles over his estate, which was estimated at $25, $40 million. This wasn't about greed or financial disputes. It was about self-preservation and dignity. But for Brooke, this wasn't about making a statement. It was about survival. She anticipated disputes, especially with Hogan's. New wife potentially claiming 30% under Florida law, and she wanted no part of the family drama that would inevitably follow his death. The legacy that Hulk Hogan left behind is as complex and contradictory as the man himself. On one hand, there's no denying his monumental impact on professional wrestling and popular culture. Hogan is widely regarded as one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time, a 12-time world champion whose Hulkamania phenomenon transformed wrestling into a mainstream entertainment juggernaut.
It's going to be the survival of the quickest draw, because once you get on that level, everybody's gunning for you. I don't care what the storyline is. You got to make your own breaks when you get to that level. You got to outthink the office, you got to outthink the business, you got to outthink the company. And once you get on that level, you've got to make your own breaks.
His match against Andre the Giant on February 5th, 1988, achieved a 15.2 Nielsen rating and 33 million viewers, one of the highest in wrestling history. He was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2005 individually, and in 2021 as part of the NWO, cementing his place in wrestling history. Hogan's crossover into Hollywood, with roles in Rocky III, 1982, and No Holds Barred, 1989, and his reality show Hogan Knows Best, 2005 to 2007, cemented his status as a pop culture icon. For millions of fans around the world, Hulk Hogan represented the American dream, a larger-than-life hero who stood for training, prayers, and vitamins. In his final years, Hogan's attempt at redemption through faith became a significant part of how he wanted to be remembered.
Oh my gosh, please forgive me. Please forgive me. I'm a nice guy.
After his death, some tributes highlighted his baptism and spiritual journey, with commentators like Charlie Kirk stating that Hulk Hogan left us with many memories, but his greatest legacy is that 18 months ago, he and his wife were baptized and gave their lives to Jesus Christ. His charitable work over the decades was also part of his legacy. He was named the most requested celebrity of the 1980s for the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and he supported numerous organizations, including the American Diabetes Association and the Special Olympics. These efforts showed a man who genuinely wanted to give back and help others, particularly children. But perhaps the most honest assessment of Hulk Hogan's legacy comes from his own daughter's words. Despite everything he put her through, Brooke believed in the possibility of reunion, writing, "He used to remind me, all of this is temporary and I'll always find my way back to you. I truly believe that. We will find each other in every lifetime." President Donald Trump, a longtime friend, described Hogan as MAGA all the way and praised his speech at the 2024 Republican National Convention. But even these tributes couldn't erase the complex reality of who Hulk Hogan really was behind the character. In the end, Hulk Hogan's greatest victory might have been his daughter's courage to finally tell the truth about who he really was behind the character. And his greatest defeat wasn't losing a match or facing scandal, it was losing the love and respect of the daughter who had once looked up to him as her hero. That's a loss that no amount of fame, fortune, or redemption can ever truly overcome. That will be all for now.
Don't judge somebody on the decisions that they made when you don't know the options they had to choose from.
It looks like Hulk Hogan's daughter, Brooke, could be facing serious time behind bars after new evidence linked her to some of her father's shadiest dealings. And with Hulk's long history of scandals, the real question is, what has he dragged Brooke into? Let me break it down. The rise and fall of America's wrestling family. It seems Hulk's death left more than just grief for his daughter. He left baggage and things aren't looking good. But before we get into what Hulk may have dragged her into, we need to go back to where it all began. The story begins in the golden era of professional wrestling, when Hulk Hogan was transforming from Terry Jean Bollea into the most recognizable face in sports entertainment. Born on August 11th, 1953, in Augusta, Georgia, Hogan would rise to become not just a wrestling superstar, but a cultural phenomenon that transcended the squared circle. With his signature mustache, bandana, and the rallying cry of Hulkamania, he became the face of the World Wrestling Federation during its most explosive period of growth in the 1980s. But behind the scenes, the man who preached about training, prayers, and vitamins was building a family that would become both his greatest joy and his ultimate downfall. In 1983, Hogan married Linda Claridge, a former flight attendant who would stand by his side as he conquered the wrestling world. Together, they would have two children who would grow up in the spotlight: Brooke Ellen Bollea, born on May 5, 1988, and Nicholas Allen Bollea, born on July 27, 1990. For years, the Hogan family represented the American dream. Hulk was the ultimate good guy, the hero who always triumphed over evil, while Linda played the supportive wife and mother. Their children, Brooke and Nick, were being groomed for their own entertainment careers, with Brooke showing early promise as a singer and performer. The family lived in a lavish home in Clearwater, Florida, seemingly living the perfect life that millions of Americans could only dream of. The family's decision to allow cameras into their home for the VH1 reality series Hogan Knows Best in 2005 would prove to be both a blessing and a curse. The show, which ran until 2007, gave viewers an intimate look at the Hogan family's daily life, but it also exposed the cracks that were beginning to form in their seemingly perfect facade. Viewers saw Hulk's overprotective nature toward his daughter Brooke, including the infamous GPS tracker he installed in her car to monitor her movements. The show portrayed Hulk as a doting but controlling father who struggled with his daughter's growing independence. In one memorable episode, viewers watched as he reacted with barely contained rage when Brooke brought home potential suitors. The show became VH1's highest-rated series at the time, but it also began to reveal the dysfunction that lurked beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect family. Brooke, who was just 16 when the show began, found herself navigating the treacherous waters of adolescence under the watchful eye of both her overprotective father and a national television audience. She had graduated high school at 16 and was pursuing her music career with the kind of determination that seemed to run in the Hogan family. Her debut single, Everything to Me, topped the Hot 100 singles sales chart, and her album, Undiscovered, would eventually peak at number 28 on the Billboard 200. But even as Brooke's career was taking off, the first signs of serious trouble were beginning to emerge within the Hogan household. Nick, the younger of the two Hogan children, was developing a passion for cars and racing that would soon lead to tragedy. By 2006, he had earned a Formula D drifting license and was competing in events, with his father's full support and encouragement. However, Nick's driving record was already becoming a cause for concern. Between 2006 and 2007, he accumulated multiple speeding tickets, including a citation for driving 115 miles per hour in a 70 miles per hour zone, and another for driving 106 miles per hour in a 70 miles per hour zone. These weren't just teenage indiscretions. They were warning signs of the reckless behavior that would soon shatter the Hogan family's carefully constructed image. The tragedy that would mark the beginning of the end for the Hogan family occurred on August 26, 2007, when 17-year-old Nick crashed his Toyota Supra while street racing. The accident left his passenger, John Graziano, a U.S. Marine veteran, permanently disabled with severe brain damage. Nick, who had been drinking and was racing another car at high speeds on a wet road, was charged with reckless driving involving serious bodily injury. The aftermath of the crash would expose the ugly underbelly of the Hogan family's dynamics. In leaked jailhouse phone calls, Hulk was heard making shocking statements about the accident, including blaming the victim and making racially insensitive comments. Nick pleaded no contest and was sentenced to 8 months in jail, but the damage to the family's reputation was far more severe than any legal consequences. As the Hogan family reeled from the scandals surrounding Nick's accident, their personal lives were simultaneously imploding behind closed doors. Hulk's marriage to Linda was crumbling amid allegations of infidelity, including a particularly devastating affair with Christiane Plant, who was not only a family friend, but also someone who had worked closely with Brooke on her music career. The betrayal was devastating for Brooke, who felt personally violated by the affair. Linda filed for divorce in November 2007, and what followed was one of the most acrimonious celebrity divorces in recent memory. The proceedings would drag on for years, with both sides making increasingly bitter accusations against each other. Linda would later accuse Hulk of being an intimacy addict and a complete liar, claims that would be supported by Hulk's own later admissions about his numerous infidelities. The divorce wasn't just about money or property, it was a battle for the souls of their children. Brooke found herself caught in the middle, initially siding with her mother, but trying to maintain some relationship with her father. The stress of the situation was enormous, and it began to take a visible toll on the young woman who had once been the darling of reality television. As the family's public image continued to deteriorate, Brooke attempted to distance herself from the chaos by focusing on her career. Her spin-off show, Brooke Knows Best, premiered in 2008, focusing on her life as a young adult, trying to establish her independence. The show provided a glimpse into Brooke's struggle to define herself outside of her family's increasingly toxic dynamics, but it also highlighted just how much the family's problems were affecting her personally and professionally. The show depicted a young woman who was mature beyond her years, forced to navigate complex family relationships while also trying to build her own career in the entertainment industry. Viewers could see the strain in her face, the weight of being the responsible sibling in a family that seemed to be spiraling out of control. The series ran until 2009, but by then, the damage to the family was becoming irreparable. During this period, Hulk was also dealing with his own personal demons. He later admitted to being suicidal during the divorce proceedings, and friends close to the family reported that he was struggling with depression and feelings of isolation. The man who had once been America's hero was now seen as a fallen idol, someone whose personal failings had destroyed not just his own life, but the lives of his children as well. The financial implications of the divorce were staggering. The settlement ultimately gave Hogan about 30% of their $10 million in assets, but the emotional cost was far higher. The family that had once been the epitome of American success was now a cautionary tale about the dangers of fame, ego, and unchecked personal behavior. As you'll soon find out, at this point, the worst was yet to come. The racist scandal that would emerge in 2015 would not only destroy Hulk's professional relationships, but would also drive the final wedge between him and his daughter Brooke. The pattern of behavior that had been building for years would finally reach its breaking point, leading to an estrangement that would last until Hulk's death in 2025. The racist scandal that destroyed everything. If the Hogan family's story had ended with the divorce and Nick's car accident, it might have been remembered as just another celebrity family that couldn't handle fame. But in 2015, a scandal would emerge that would not only destroy Hulk Hogan's career, but would also drive the final, irreparable wedge between him and his daughter Brooke. Irreparable wedge between him and his daughter Brooke. This wasn't just about family dysfunction anymore. This was about racism, betrayal, and the ugly truth about who Hulk Hogan really was behind the cameras. The scandal that would change everything began years earlier, but it wouldn't come to light until 2015 when the National Enquirer published transcripts of audio recordings that had been secretly made during Hogan's 2007 intimate encounter with Heather Clem, the wife of his friend Bubba the Love Sponge. These recordings would reveal a side of Hulk Hogan that was so shocking, so fundamentally at odds with his public persona, that it would effectively end his career and destroy his relationship with his daughter forever. The recordings captured Hogan using racial slurs repeatedly, including the N-word, while discussing his daughter Brooke's dating life. But it wasn't just the use of racist language that was so damaging. It was the context in which he used it and the vile things he said about his own daughter. In the recordings, Hogan expressed disgust at the idea of Brooke dating a black man using the most offensive racial language imaginable, and even calling Brooke a for her relationship choices. The immediate fallout was swift and devastating. On July 24, 2015, WWE fired Hogan, removing him from their Hall of Fame and scrubbing his presence from their website and merchandise. This wasn't just a suspension or a temporary punishment. This was a complete erasure of one of the most important figures in wrestling history. The company that had built much of its success on Hogan's broad shoulders was now treating him as if he had never existed. For Brooke, the revelation was particularly devastating because the racist comments were specifically about her and her personal relationships. The betrayal was profound and personal in a way that went far beyond typical family disagreements. Initially, Brooke's response was to defend her father publicly. She gave interviews, and in one of them she said,
I don't support what he said. But he's my dad. I love him. That's not who he is, though. He's not racist.
She even wrote a poem on Facebook defending him, emphasizing forgiveness and family loyalty despite the controversy. The poem included lines about how if people knew the father she knew, they would understand that he had raised her well and taught her that people are more than their worst moments. It was a touching display of loyalty from a daughter trying to protect her father, but it would later become something she deeply regretted. What makes Brooke's initial defense even more tragic is that she was clearly trying to reconcile the father she thought she knew with the man revealed in those recordings. She later admitted that she had been misinformed, manipulated, and lied to about the extent of her father's racist views and behavior. The realization that she had publicly defended someone who had spoken about her in such vile terms was devastating. Hulk himself attempted to explain his actions in a later interview, saying
I was at the lowest point of my life. My personal life was destroyed. I was very mad at my daughter. I was upset over a situation that happened between her and her boyfriend, and I had no idea I was being taped.
But his explanations only made things worse. When asked directly if he was racist, he responded saying,
No, I'm not. I'm not a racist. I never should have said what I said. It was wrong. I'm embarrassed by it. But a lot of people need to realize that you inherit things from your environment.
His attempt to blame his upbringing and environment for his racist views was seen by many as an inadequate excuse that failed to take full responsibility for his actions. The damage to his reputation was irreversible, but more importantly for our story, the damage to his relationship with Brooke was just beginning. The racist scandal wasn't happening in isolation. It was occurring against the backdrop of an already fractured family dealing with multiple crises. The recordings that captured Hogan's racist rants were made in 2007, during the same period when his son Nick was dealing with the aftermath of his car accident and the family was going through their bitter divorce. As the 2015 scandal unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just about one racist rant caught on tape. Additional recordings from jail calls during Nick's incarceration revealed more racist language, including Hogan making statements about not wanting to be reincarnated as a black person and expressing other racially charged views. The pattern of racist thinking was undeniable, and it painted a picture of a man whose public persona was completely at odds with his private beliefs. For Brooke, the accumulation of evidence about her father's true character was overwhelming. She began to realize that the man she had defended was not the man she thought she knew. The professional consequences for Hulk continued to mount. Beyond WWE's termination, multiple other business relationships were severed. Sponsors dropped him, appearances were canceled, and merchandise featuring his likeness was pulled from stores. The man who had once been worth an estimated $15 million saw his earning potential evaporate virtually overnight, but perhaps more devastating than the financial losses was the personal cost. Brooke began to distance herself from her father, and their relationship, which had already been strained by years of family dysfunction, began to deteriorate rapidly. The racist scandal wasn't just about his views on race, it was about his views on her, his willingness to demean and dehumanize her choices, and his fundamental failure as a father to respect and support his daughter. During this period, Brooke was also dealing with her own personal relationships and trying to build a life separate from her family's chaos. She had been engaged to former Dallas Cowboys player Phil Costa in 2013, but that relationship had ended amid the ongoing family drama. The constant stress and public scrutiny made it difficult for her to maintain normal relationships, and she began to realize that her association with her father was becoming a liability in every aspect of her life. The scandal also highlighted the broader issues within the wrestling industry and its culture. Professional wrestling has long had problems with racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination, and Hogan's comments were seen by many as representative of attitudes that were unfortunately common within the industry. Scandal forced WWE and other wrestling organizations to confront these issues more directly, leading to changes in policies and a greater emphasis on diversity and inclusion. As the years passed after the 2015 scandal, it became clear that the damage to the Hogan family was permanent. Brooke's relationship with her father continued to deteriorate, and by the late 2010s, they were rarely speaking. Brooke's mother confirmed this online when she came out to say this.
Brooke doesn't talk to us. She's had twins. She got married. She didn't tell us. She had twins. She didn't tell us. She had a huge fight with Terry. I don't know how that reflected onto me, but she cut me out too.
WWE eventually reinstated Hogan in 2018 after he made what the company deemed appropriate apologies and underwent sensitivity training. However, the reinstatement was controversial, with many fans and wrestlers feeling that he had not done enough to earn forgiveness for his comments. The fact that he was allowed back into WWE while his relationship with his own daughter remained fractured spoke volumes about the different standards applied to public and private forgiveness. The period following the scandal also saw the emergence of other family issues that had been simmering beneath the surface. Brooke began to speak more openly about the abuse she had suffered during her childhood, describing patterns of extreme verbal and mental mistreatment that would frequently turn physical. These revelations painted a picture of a family where the dysfunction went far deeper than just the publicized scandals, but their story was far from over. Family destruction and wrestling's dark legacy. As we enter the final part of the Hogan family saga, we find ourselves in 2025, with Hulk Hogan's death on July 24th at age 71 from cardiac arrest, serving as the tragic conclusion to one of wrestling's most dysfunctional family stories. But his death didn't bring reconciliation or closure. Instead, it highlighted just how completely the family had been destroyed by decades of mistreatment, scandal, and mutual recrimination. Brooke's estrangement from her father had become complete by 2023 when she made the extraordinary decision decision to ask to be removed from his will. This wasn't just about money, it was about making a final statement that she wanted nothing to do with her father's legacy. She reportedly hadn't spoken to him since September 2023, after a phone call where she expressed concerns about his declining health that he dismissed. The final years of Hulk's life were marked by increasing isolation from his children and mounting health problems. He had undergone over 25 surgeries related to his wrestling career, and by 2025, his body was failing. Yet even as his health deteriorated, the rift with Brooke only deepened. When she married NHL player Stephen Oleksy in 2022, Hulk wasn't invited. When she gave birth to twins in January 2025, he wasn't informed. The depth of the estrangement became clear in Brooke's public statements about the mistreatment she had suffered. In March 2025, described the ill treatment she'd suffered at the hands of her family as vicious and aimed at breaking her spirit. Linda Hogan's emotional breakdown video also revealed the extent of the family's destruction from
My family is in the worst mess.
Linda blamed Hulk for the family's destruction and revealed that Brooke had cut off contact with both parents for about 7-8 years. The family that had once been America's wrestling royalty was now completely fractured, with each member dealing with their own trauma and pain. When Hulk died in July 2025, Brooke was notably absent from WWE tributes. She later explained that WWE hadn't invited her, but many interpreted her absence as a final statement about her relationship with her father's legacy. Even after his death, she maintained that there had been no big fight, but rather a gradual drift caused by her need to establish boundaries. The Hogan family's destruction is particularly tragic because it represents the complete failure of what should have been unconditional love and support. But as devastating as their story is, it's far from unique in the wrestling world. The industry has a long and troubling history of family dysfunction that makes the Hogan saga seem almost typical rather than exceptional. Consider the Von Erich family tragedy, where Fritz Von Erich's control led to the deaths of 5 of his 6 sons. Jack died at age 7 from electrocution and drowning in 1959. David died at 25 in 1984 from what was officially listed as an intestinal issue, but was possibly an overdose. Mike died at 23 in 1987 from an overdose following a brain injury. Chris took his own life at 21 in 1991 amid depression and drug issues. Kerry died by at 33 in 1993 following amputation and divorce. Fritz forced wrestling careers on his sons, ignoring their health and well-being, and substance abuse became rampant in the family. Even more shocking is the Chris Benoit murder self-killing of June 2007, where the wrestler strangled his wife Nancy, suffocated his 7-year-old son Daniel with Xanax, and then hung himself. Autopsy results revealed that Benoit's brain resembled that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient due to concussions, highlighting how the physical demands of wrestling can contribute to mental deterioration and family violence. The pattern continues with cases like Grizzly Smith, whose ill treatment spanned decades and included taking advantage of his children and stepchildren. His son Jake Roberts revealed being conceived via Smith's harassment of his 12-year-old grandmother. Smith did the same thing to multiple children in the family, creating a cycle of trauma that affected multiple generations. More recently, we've seen cases like Billy Jack Haynes, who was charged with the murder of his 85-year-old wife Jeanette Becraft in February 2024. Police found Becraft dead from a gunshot wound to the head, and Haynes barricaded himself, leading to a 2-hour standoff. Investigations revealed a history of domestic disputes, with Haynes reportedly isolating Becraft and exhibiting disturbing behavior. As of May 2025, Haynes was ruled mentally unfit for trial due to cognitive decline, with Becraft's estate filing a $750,000 wrongful death lawsuit. The wrestling industry also saw the Buck Zumhofe case, where the wrestler was convicted of taking advantage of his daughter for over a decade. Starting when she was 15 in 1999 and lasting until 2011, Zumhofe's daughter testified to hundreds of assaults. He was sentenced to 25 years plus 10 for attempted escape, and as of July 2025, he remains incarcerated with no parole eligibility until 2031. Even current wrestling stars haven't been immune to family controversies. Nikki Garcia filed for divorce from Artem Chigvintsev in September 2024 after his August domestic violence arrest, with Garcia seeking full custody of their 4-year-old son Mateo. The settlement was finalized in May 2025, with Garcia paying $3,500 monthly child support, plus a $200,000 lump sum. What's particularly disturbing about these cases is how they reveal the toxic culture that has long existed within professional wrestling. The combination of steroid use, physical violence, constant travel, and a boys will be boys mentality has created an environment where domestic violence and child mistreatment are often overlooked or covered up. The industry's emphasis on hypermasculinity and aggression has normalized behaviors that would be unacceptable in most other professions. The steroid culture in wrestling has been particularly damaging to family relationships. Many wrestlers, including Hulk Hogan, have admitted to extensive steroid use, and the documented side effects of these drugs include increased aggression, mood swings, and violent behavior. When you combine these chemical influences with the physical pain and mental stress of a wrestling career, it creates a volatile combination that often explodes within the family home. The constant travel required by wrestling careers has also contributed to family dysfunction. Wrestlers spend months on the road, away from their families, which strains marriages and leaves children feeling abandoned by their parents. When wrestlers do return home, they're often dealing with physical pain, exhaustion, and the pressure to maintain their public personas, leaving little emotional energy for genuine family relationships. The Chris Adams case provides another example of how wrestling culture can destroy families. Adams was charged with manslaughter in the 2000 overdose death of girlfriend Linda Kapengst from GHB and alcohol. Evidence suggested he introduced her to GHB amid a toxic relationship marked by mutual substance abuse and violence. Before trial, Adams was shot dead by friend Brent Parnell during a cocaine-fueled argument. The financial pressures of wrestling have also contributed to family problems. Many wrestlers, despite their fame, struggle financially due to the industry's independent contractor system, lack of health insurance, and the physical toll that shortens careers. This financial stress often leads to wrestlers staying on the road longer, taking more dangerous bumps, and using more drugs to manage pain, all of which further damages family relationships. Perhaps most tragically, the children of wrestlers often suffer the most from these dysfunctional family dynamics. Brooke Hogan's experience is unfortunately typical. Growing up in a household where ill treatment was normalized, where public image was more important than private relationships, and where the child's needs were secondary to the parent's career and ego. The pattern of abuse in wrestling families often continues across generations, as children who grow up in these environments often struggle to form healthy relationships themselves. The normalization of violence, the lack of emotional support, and the constant public scrutiny create lasting trauma that affects not just the wrestlers themselves, but their children and grandchildren. The wrestling industry has begun to address some of these issues in recent years. WWE has implemented wellness policies, drug testing, and counseling services for their performers. However, the culture change has been slow, and many of the wrestlers from earlier eras, like Hulk Hogan, never received the support they needed to break these destructive patterns. Brooke's decision to break the cycle by removing herself from her father's life and will represents a form of survival that many children of wrestlers have had to embrace. She has spoken about therapy and the importance of breaking the chain of abuse and dysfunction that characterized her childhood. The tragedy of Hulk Hogan's death in 2025 is not just that a wrestling legend passed away, but that he died estranged from his daughter, having never taken responsibility for the damage he caused to his family. Even reports that he nearly died during childbirth of her twins failed to prompt any attempt at reconciliation. Her husband, Stephen Alexi, attempted to maintain some contact with Hulk amid the rift, but even the birth of grandchildren wasn't enough to bridge the gap that decades of abuse and racism had created. Following Hulk's death, Brooke shared an emotional tribute addressing their estrangement. She expressed gratitude for one final chance to say "I love you" and reflected on his love despite the pain. Brooke's twins, Oliver and Molly, born in January 2025, represent hope for the future, a new generation that won't be subjected to the abuse and dysfunction that characterized previous generations of the Hogan family. By choosing to break contact with her parents and remove herself from her father's will, Brooke has made a powerful statement that the cycle of abuse ends with her.
You get something straight. Nobody made me. Nobody owns me. And nobody sure as hell tells me what to do.
The Undertaker has never been afraid to stand up to Vince McMahon. Now he's accusing him of killing Hulk Hogan through decades of ruthless exploitation.
I've had 17 surgeries in the last 10 years.
Oh my God. What's not original here?
The knees are fake. The hips are fake. The back's full of metal. And part of my face is full of metal.
And Hulk isn't the only name he's bringing up. The Undertaker is confronting Vince about the entire trail of fallen wrestlers left in his wake. Let me break it down. How Vince McMahon's system destroyed wrestling's heroes. The wrestling world was shaken on July 24, 2025, when Hulk Hogan died at age 71 from a heart attack. But behind the tributes and public mourning lies a darker truth, one that wrestling insiders have whispered about for decades. According to The Undertaker, what killed Hogan wasn't just cardiac arrest. It was the slow, systematic destruction of bodies and minds, fueled by a culture of brutality, steroid abuse, and psychological warfare, all orchestrated by one man, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. The signs were always there, hidden in plain sight beneath the bright lights and pyrotechnics. Vince McMahon's wrestling culture in WWE has been criticized for prioritizing spectacle, potentially at the cost of wrestler health. For over 4 decades, McMahon built an empire not just on entertainment, but on the broken bodies and shattered minds of the very performers who made him billions.
I didn't get the memo about the fake wrestling.
I was going to say.
Yeah, I missed that part. You know, it's predetermined. We know who's going to win or lose, but what people don't understand is it's very physical. And back in the day, in the 70s, when I first started, I've still got like teeth marks on my finger.
Hogan himself admitted the brutal physical reality of what McMahon's system demanded. The man who became wrestling's biggest icon was systematically destroying his body from the very beginning, conditioned to see pain and injury as normal parts of the business rather than warning signs of systematic abuse.
My eye reconstructed a couple times from getting hit in the face. Nose broken 13 times. All these teeth, these fake teeth, have been knocked out 6 times. So it's been a wild ride.
This wasn't just the normal wear and tear of athletic competition. This was systematic physical destruction that McMahon's system normalized and even celebrated. Hogan was conditioned to see his body as expendable, a tool to be broken and rebuilt in service of McMahon's entertainment empire. When we examine the systematic health crisis that plagued WWE under McMahon's leadership, a horrifying pattern emerges. It seems likely that steroid use was widespread in the 1980s and 1990s, linked to long-term health issues like heart disease and mental health problems. This wasn't just about enhancing performance, it was about creating an environment where wrestlers felt compelled to sacrifice their long-term health for short-term success. The numbers tell a story that should haunt every wrestling fan. A 2014 study showed wrestlers are 15 times more likely to die from cardiovascular causes and 122 times more likely from drug overdoses compared to the general population. These aren't just statistics, they represent human lives cut short by a system that treated performers as expendable commodities rather than human beings.
I've had 17 surgeries in the last 10 years.
Oh my God. What's not original here?
The knees are fake, the hips are fake, the back's full of metal, and part of my face is full of metal.
Hogan's own body became a monument to McMahon's systematic destruction. 17 surgeries in 10 years. This wasn't just aging. This was the accumulated damage from decades of systematic abuse that McMahon's system had normalized. Every surgery represented another attempt to repair what the wrestling machine had broken. McMahon's empire was built on what can only be described as a culture of fear and physical destruction.
WWE, quote, is a kingdom ruled by fear. It is the motivating factor everywhere. Fear, one writer said.
This fear wasn't just psychological. It extended to the very real terror that speaking up about health concerns, steroid abuse, or unsafe working conditions could end your career instantly.
When you get older, you kind of crunch up a little bit anyway. All those things added up, you know, so it's very, very physical.
There are some wrestlers, and maybe a lot of wrestlers, who deal with this with alcohol and drugs because of pain.
Yeah.
Hogan understood the systematic nature of the problem. The pain wasn't just individual, it was generational, affecting entire cohorts of wrestlers who had been put through McMahon's machine. The alcohol and drug abuse wasn't moral failing. It was a predictable response to systematic physical destruction.
How common is that?
It's very common. When I was wrestling full-time, all of us did.
The admission is stunning in its simplicity. Under McMahon's system, drug abuse wasn't the exception, it was the rule. All of us did. Every performer in McMahon's empire was systematically pushed into pharmaceutical dependence as a way to survive the physical demands of the system.
There was a very heavy layer of fear and tension, and that was directly from Vince. And the culture that he created obviously created a lot of problems. The writers all agreed that the culture of fear spread throughout the company from the writers' room to the road, all the way to the promotion's headquarters, where they all witnessed varying degrees of verbal abuse.
This culture didn't just affect mid-card wrestlers or backstage personnel, it reached the very top of the company, creating an environment where even the biggest stars like Hogan lived in constant anxiety about their position and future. The psychological stress of navigating McMahon's unpredictable demands took a toll that extended far beyond the wrestling ring.
You ever do it?
Yes. Yes.
There was a time you said no.
Yeah, one time.
I've trained 20 years, 2 hours a day to look like I do.
But the things that I am not is I'm not a steroid abuser, and I do not use steroids.
Even Hogan's admission of steroid use came wrapped in the psychological conditioning that McMahon's system had instilled. The denial, the rationalization, the attempt to minimize the scope of the abuse, all of it reflects how deeply McMahon's culture had penetrated the minds of his performers.
And actually, when I said no, I wasn't on steroids at the time, so I was playing with words.
Knowing what you've gone through, if you could make a decision again on whether to go into wrestling, having become the Bionic Man, would you do it again?
A running clothesline! There, Macho, go after the eye! Oh, no! F5! Plants Hogan!
Oh, yeah. I'll do it all over again.
The most chilling aspect of Hogan's testimony is his continued loyalty to the system that destroyed him. Even after 17 surgeries, even after admitting to systematic steroid abuse, even after becoming what he called the Bionic Man, he would do it all again. This is the ultimate proof of how effectively McMahon's psychological conditioning worked. His victims remained loyal even as the system killed them.
Everybody was getting yelled at all the time in the room, one former writer said. It was more saying stuff, I'm editing myself, that was humiliating or mean, couched as a joke. But it's a nasty joke. If you're being targeted in a room, nobody stands up for you. But that's because if they do, they will get the bullet in the head too.
This culture of silence had deadly consequences for wrestlers like Hogan. When performers suffered injuries, addiction, or health problems, they learned to suffer in silence rather than risk McMahon's wrath. The evidence leans toward significant physical and mental health tolls, including concussions and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, with tragic cases like Chris Benoit highlighting these risks. How McMahon's steroid empire destroyed Hogan's body. To understand how Vince McMahon's system killed Hulk Hogan, we must dive deep into the pharmaceutical nightmare that defined professional wrestling under his reign. This wasn't just about performance enhancement. This was about the systematic poisoning of an entire generation of performers, with Hogan serving as both the poster child for success and the ultimate victim of a machine designed to consume human bodies for profit.
It's hard to believe when you see somebody this big that steroids is not kind of the common drug in the ring.
Okay.
The interviewer's observation cuts to the heart of McMahon's pharmaceutical empire. Hogan's massive physique wasn't natural. It was the product of systematic chemical enhancement that McMahon's system not only tolerated, but demanded. The size that made Hogan famous was also slowly killing him.
You ever do it?
Yes. Yes.
There was a time you said no.
Yeah, one time.
I trained 20 years, 2 hours a day to look like I do. But the things that I am not is I'm not a steroid abuser, and I do not use steroids.
Hogan's initial denial, even while admitting use, reveals the psychological conditioning that McMahon's system instilled. The distinction between use and abuse was meaningless when the system demanded continuous chemical enhancement to maintain position and relevance. Hogan's death from acute myocardial infarction, with contributing factors including chronic lymphocytic leukemia, represents the final chapter in a story that began decades earlier when McMahon transformed professional wrestling into a pharmaceutical experiment with human subjects. The cardiac arrest that claimed Hogan's life wasn't random. It was the predictable endpoint of systematic steroid abuse that McMahon not only tolerated, but actively encouraged. The systematic nature of McMahon's pharmaceutical empire becomes undeniable when we examine the institutional support for steroid distribution. The 1994 steroid trial revealed that Dr. George Zahorian III, a ringside doctor, had supplied steroids to WWE, specifically to McMahon's office, indicating a systemic issue. This wasn't wrestlers making individual choices. This was an institutionalized system of drug distribution operating under McMahon's direct supervision, with Hogan as one of its primary beneficiaries and victims. The scope of McMahon's pharmaceutical empire becomes clear when we examine the systematic health consequences that followed his rise to power. Steroid use has been associated with cardiovascular problems, including heart attacks and strokes, due to increased heart size and impaired pumping ability, leading to arrhythmias and premature cardiac arrest. Hogan's death fits this medical profile perfectly. The enlarged heart, the cardiovascular complications, the premature cardiac failure that marks the end stage of chronic steroid abuse.
I was 6'7" before the Rocky movie.
How tall are you now?
I'm 6'4.5".
How could you lose almost 3 inches?
Fast forward 35 years later, dropping a leg drop every night on my spine, 2 knee replacements, 2 hip replacements, 9 back surgeries.
The physical compression of Hogan's body tells the complete story of McMahon's systematic destruction. 3 inches of height lost to spinal compression, multiple joint replacements, 9 back surgeries. This wasn't just the wear and tear of athletic competition. This was the systematic breakdown of a human skeleton under the combined assault of steroid-induced tissue damage and repetitive physical trauma. The death toll from McMahon's pharmaceutical machine reads like a casualty report from a chemical warfare attack. Ultimate Warrior died at 54 from heart failure in 2014. Roddy Piper suffered cardiac arrest at 61 in 2015. And Randy Savage died at 58 with an enlarged heart and 90% artery blockage in 2011. Each name represents not just a statistic, but a human being whose cardiovascular system was systematically destroyed by the same pharmaceutical cocktail that ultimately claimed Hogan's life.
My knees, I've had 3 or 4 surgeries on my knees, each knee before I had them replaced.
What's not original here?
The knees are fake, the hips are fake.
The systematic replacement of Hogan's joints reveals how thoroughly McMahon's system had destroyed his body. These weren't injuries from specific incidents. They were the predictable result of decades of steroid-induced tissue breakdown, combined with the repetitive trauma that McMahon's entertainment machine demanded. But the pharmaceutical nightmare extended far beyond just steroids. Painkiller dependence, often mixed with alcohol, has also contributed to overdoses and deaths. Hogan himself became trapped in this secondary pharmaceutical web, admitting to developing dependence, washing down dozens of pills with alcohol. This wasn't just about managing pain. This was about surviving in an environment that systematically broke down human bodies and then offered more drugs as the only solution. The systematic nature of McMahon's pharmaceutical destruction becomes even clearer when we examine how the organization handled health concerns. WWE's lack of health insurance, noting that as independent contractors, wrestlers lack pensions and health care, leading to degenerating joints, back issues, and required surgeries. This wasn't just corporate negligence, it was a deliberate strategy to avoid responsibility for the pharmaceutical nightmare they had created, while pushing the costs onto the performers themselves. The medical evidence surrounding Hogan's death tells the complete story of McMahon's pharmaceutical destruction. Medical records confirmed he died from acute myocardial infarction, with contributing factors such as a history of atrial fibrillation and chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Each of these conditions has direct links to chronic steroid abuse, the enlarged heart struggling to pump blood, the irregular heartbeat caused by damaged cardiac tissue, and the compromised immune system that allowed cancer to take hold. What makes this even more tragic is how preventable Hogan's death could have been if McMahon had prioritized performer health over pharmaceutical enhancement. The cardiovascular damage that ultimately killed Hogan was entirely predictable and preventable if the focus had been on human health rather than pharmaceutical profits. How McMahon's system consumed its greatest star. The death of Hulk Hogan on July 24, 2025, represents more than just the loss of a wrestling icon. It stands as the ultimate indictment of Vince McMahon's systematic destruction of human lives in service of entertainment profits. When we examine the final years of Hogan's life through his own words and experiences, we see not just the story of one man's decline, but the inevitable conclusion of a system designed to consume its performers completely, body and soul.
Well, I got to a point where everything kind of hit me at the same time. The divorce, my whole world falling apart. Both of the kids were with Linda, and that's how I ended up playing with a gun.
Hogan's admission of suicidal ideation wasn't just about personal problems. It was about the systematic psychological breakdown that McMahon's system inflicted on its biggest stars. The man who had been conditioned for decades to see himself as invincible gradually came to understand that he was broken, expendable, and consumed by the very machine that had created him.
I was to the point where I wanted to kill myself. I sat in my bathroom by myself when my ex-wife was gone and the kids were gone, and I was completely broken and destroyed. And I said, what's the easiest way out of this? I mean, I was lost.
You were suicidal.
Yes, I was.
This psychological collapse wasn't just about personal failures or controversies. It was about the systematic dismantling of a human being's sense of self-worth by a system that had never valued him as anything more than a revenue-generating asset. McMahon's empire had built Hogan up not to celebrate his humanity, but to exploit it more effectively. Hogan's death from acute myocardial infarction, with contributing factors including chronic lymphocytic leukemia and atrial fibrillation, tells the complete story of what McMahon's empire ultimately does to human bodies. This wasn't just an elderly man succumbing to natural causes. This was the systematic breakdown of a cardiovascular system that had been pushed beyond its limits for decades.
Well, it leaves me with the people that love me and the people that are loyal to me and the people that have stuck with me all this time. It was probably the worst day of my life when I said that 8 years ago. I'd bottomed out.
The psychological destruction that McMahon's system inflicted on Hogan was as devastating as the physical damage. The culture of fear, the constant pressure to maintain an impossible standard of perfection, and the systematic dehumanization had reduced the world's most famous wrestler to a broken man contemplating suicide in his bathroom.
I made friends with Layla Ali, and during the day, I had several phone calls. I picked it up and said, hey, we're just checking on you. I want to make sure everything's cool.
The fact that a phone call from Layla Ali potentially saved Hogan's life reveals how completely McMahon's system had isolated him. The man who had been surrounded by millions of fans, countless colleagues, and industry insiders was ultimately alone when he needed human connection most, a direct result of the competitive, fear-based culture that McMahon had created.
And just her saying hello to me and saying, yeah, we're just checking on you, make sure everything's okay. That pretty much woke me up. And in that moment, I said, you know what? There are a lot of good people out there.
So Layla Ali in some way saved your life.
The tragic irony is that it took someone from outside McMahon's wrestling system to provide the human compassion that could have prevented Hogan's suicide. The wrestling industry that had made billions from Hogan's performances had created a culture where genuine human concern was so rare that a simple phone call became life-saving. The systematic nature of McMahon's destruction becomes clear when we examine the accumulated physical damage that Hogan's body had endured. Hogan's later years were marked by health problems, including neck and back surgeries, each surgery a testament to the decades of systematic abuse that McMahon's entertainment machine had demanded. The culture of fear that defined McMahon's empire played a crucial role in preventing Hogan from getting the help he needed.
The mood of Vince McMahon, he always said he gauged whether Vince was in a good mood or a bad mood. He looked at the writers, or he stuck his head in the writers' room, and if they were happy, Vince was in a good mood. If they were sad or pensive or anxious, he knew that Vince McMahon was on a rampage and not to bother Vince.
Even as one of McMahon's biggest stars, Hogan lived in constant anxiety about his position, his future, and his value to the organization. This chronic stress, maintained over decades, contributed directly to the cardiovascular problems that would ultimately claim his life. The human body wasn't designed to operate under constant psychological threat, and Hogan's heart literally gave out under the sustained pressure.
That pop was something.
It was something.
It was a pop.
It was. That was an ego pop.
Lord have mercy. Wonder what you think he went back to the dress. Well, you were there.
I was there.
What happened? What happened backstage after he came back?
No, when I saw him, he was no-selling it and pushing his beer.
Hogan's final WWE appearance on January 6, 2025, where he was heavily booed by the Los Angeles crowd, represents the ultimate degradation of a man who had given everything to McMahon's empire, only to be discarded when he was no longer profitable. Even The Undertaker couldn't hide his lack of sympathy for Hogan's final humiliation.
I didn't see him. I wasn't backstage when he came.
Did you feel like giving him a hug afterwards?
No.
Here's Taker being a company man right
Right. Did you feel bad for him? No.
The callousness wasn't personal, it was institutional, reflecting how McMahon's system had conditioned even its most successful performers to view each other as competitors rather than fellow human beings deserving of compassion. The Undertaker's lack of sympathy for Hogan's humiliation represents the ultimate success of McMahon's psychological conditioning.
Well, hey man, I got feelings. I got feelings for people. Like, sometimes in life, things come back.
Well, I mean, it's funny that, we were talking about this last night, that, with all the podcasts and all the books and everything, and everybody realizes that Hogan wasn't the guy that he was portrayed to be.
The Undertaker's observation that everybody realizes that Hogan wasn't the guy that he was portrayed to be reveals how McMahon's system had created a false mythology around its performers while systematically destroying the human beings beneath the characters. The real Hogan had been consumed by the machine, leaving only a broken shell performing the role of a hero he had never truly been allowed to be. The medical evidence surrounding Hogan's death provides the final proof of McMahon's systematic destruction. His death following recent surgeries and health struggles wasn't just about aging. It was about a body that had been systematically broken down by decades of pharmaceutical abuse, surgical interventions, and the accumulated stress of life in McMahon's empire. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of Hogan's story is his continued loyalty to the system that destroyed him. Even after 17 surgeries, even after becoming the Bionic Man, McMahon. Even after admitting to systematic steroid abuse and suicidal ideation, he remained psychologically committed to McMahon's machine. This represents the ultimate success of McMahon's conditioning, creating victims who remained grateful for their own destruction. The ultimate tragedy of Hulk Hogan's death is that it was entirely preventable. If McMahon had prioritized performer health over profits, if the culture of fear had been replaced with genuine care for human well-being, if the systematic pharmaceutical abuse had been stopped before it became institutionalized, Hogan could still be alive today. Instead, we're left with the stark reality that Vince McMahon's empire claimed its greatest creation, consuming Hulk Hogan completely and discarding what remained when he was no longer useful. The heart attack that killed Hogan on July 24, 2025, was just the final symptom of a disease that had been eating away at him for decades. The disease of being human in an inhuman system designed by Vince McMahon. The Undertaker just dropped an explosive bombshell that could destroy Hulk Hogan's legacy.
And I'm walking down the hall, just going to my locker room, and he goes, hey brother, can I talk to you? So I go into the dressing room, I put my bag off. He goes, hey, let's go back here into the shower.
The revelation centers on a shocking incident from 1991, and it's changing how fans see the so-called American hero. Let's get into it. The foundation of betrayal. Mark Calloway's arrival as The Undertaker at Survivor Series 1990 introduced a dark, supernatural figure who'd grow into the locker room's most respected leader. Meanwhile, Hulk Hogan stood as wrestling's golden goose, the face who had dragged the industry out of carnivals and into global stardom. His Hulkamania had millions hooked, making him untouchable in the company hierarchy. But under those contrasting personas were the makings of a rivalry that bled far beyond storylines. And the first spark came from what looked, on the surface, like an act of goodwill. Hogan played a role in bringing Undertaker to WWE after they met during the filming of the 1991 movie Suburban Commando. Hogan recommended the young wrestler to Vince McMahon, helping launch what would become one of the most iconic careers in wrestling history. This initial connection seemed positive, setting the foundation for what could have been a mutually beneficial professional relationship. However, the wrestling business has always been a cutthroat environment where personal ambition often collides with professional courtesy. As 1991 progressed, it became clear that the Undertaker was being positioned as a major threat to the established order, with his mysterious undead character quickly rising through the ranks and capturing the imagination of fans who were growing weary of Hogan's repetitive heroic formula. The collision course between these two wrestling giants reached its inevitable destination on November 27, 1991, at Survivor Series in Detroit, Michigan. The match was billed as the gravest challenge, and it would prove to be far more challenging than anyone could have anticipated, though not for the reasons the wrestling world expected. The match itself followed a familiar pattern of Undertaker's early career encounters. The young phenom dominated the veteran champion, showcasing his supernatural resilience and methodical offensive style. But the finish would be anything but routine, as interference from the nature boy Ric Flair would provide the catalyst for one of the most shocking upsets in wrestling history. As the match reached its climax, Flair made his way to ringside and slid a steel chair into the ring. The Undertaker seized the opportunity, positioning Hogan for his devastating finishing maneuver, the tombstone piledriver, directly onto the unforgiving steel. What happened next would be seared into the memory of everyone present and would become the foundation for decades of real-life animosity. But to understand the true significance of what occurred that night, we must first examine the meticulous preparation that preceded the match. Earlier that day, in a scene that would become legendary in wrestling lore, Hogan had arrived at the arena unusually early. In an interview, The Undertaker recalled this pivotal moment, saying,
Hogan back in the day, you know, the rest of the talent usually had to show up by 1 o'clock on a pay-per-view TV day. Hogan usually roll in around 5, do his deal. So I get there. It's at Joe Louis Arena, Detroit, Michigan. I show up there about noon, 12:30. Hogan's already there.
What followed was a conversation that would forever change how The Undertaker viewed not only Hogan, but the entire wrestling business.
And I'm walking down the hall, just going to my locker room, and he goes, hey brother, can I talk to you? So I go into the dressing room, I put my bag off. He goes, hey, let's go back here into the shower.
The choice of venue for this conversation was significant in wrestling culture. As The Undertaker explained, the shower area was where serious business was conducted. It was there that Hogan would plant the seeds of what would later be revealed as an elaborate manipulation.
He goes, hey, I'm really nervous about taking the tombstone. got this bad neck. And I was like, Terry, I said, look, I promise you, I said, I'll take great care of you. I don't need, you don't need to worry. I'll have you. I said, just don't worry about it.
This talk built the trust Hogan would later exploit. A young Undertaker promised to protect him in the ring, a promise that would come back to haunt him in the worst way. But Hogan wasn't finished with his psychological manipulation. Throughout the day, he continued to reinforce his supposed vulnerability, creating a constant state of anxiety for his opponent.
Now, every time that I see him for the rest of the day, like, going through catering or whatnot, he gives me the old, like, don't forget what we talked about, right? He's like, he'd hold his neck, give me, brother.
This constant reminder served to heighten the Undertaker's awareness of the supposed danger he posed to the company's biggest star. The pressure was immense, and Hogan knew exactly how to exploit it. The match itself unfolded as planned, with the Undertaker dominating the action and building toward the climactic finish. When the moment came for the tombstone piledriver on the steel chair, the Undertaker was meticulous in his execution.
When I tell you, I had the man, and the man was, I've given my kids rougher bumps than I give Hogan.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I wrap him up. I've got him. The chair comes down. Boom.
But then something happened that would change everything.
Boom. I give him the tombstone. As soon as my knees hit, I hear, oh. You got me, brother.
My neck and my back.
In that instant, the Undertaker's world came crashing down.
I am much like, how I'm like, you have all these, like, I'm what, 20, I was 24, 25 years old. And, I just crushed Hulk Hogan, right? That's what's going through my head. Like, they gave me this opportunity, they gave me the chance to run with the ball, and I just hurt the golden goose.
Hogan's theatrical performance continued as he was helped from the ring, his apparent agony serving to reinforce the narrative that The Undertaker had committed a grievous error. What followed was a scene that would be burned into The Undertaker's memory forever.
So I go into Vince's office there at Joe Louis. Hogan's laid on the floor.
Oh,
Got people all around him, and I'm like, holy shit. So I'm going over, like, check on him and, apologize and everything else. Like, as soon as I start to get over there, here come the EMTs.
For a young performer who prided himself on his safety record, this was nothing short of a nightmare scenario. The emotional impact was compounded by the presence of Shane McMahon, who was attempting to provide reassurance, but whose words seemed to fall on deaf ears.
So I go behind a wall with Shane. Me and Shane are behind the wall, and I'm having to, listen to, can you feel this? Can you do that? And then I hear somebody get my wife and kids on the phone. I'm like, are you? So you can only imagine, right?
To The Undertaker, this wasn't just an injury. It felt like Hogan's career, maybe even his life, was on the line. Guilt aided him, even as others swore they'd seen nothing wrong. Meanwhile, other wrestlers who had observed the match were telling a very different story.
But so I'm walking down the hall, right? And I just think I've crippled Hulk Hogan. And, guys are coming up to me like, Mark, his head never touched. And I'm like, no, I can't hear it, right? I mean, I can't, none of that is registering with me.
The lack of immediate access to video replay technology in 1991 meant that The Undertaker would have to wait several days before he could see the footage for himself. Just 6 days after his championship victory, The Undertaker was scheduled to defend his title against Hogan at the hastily arranged This Tuesday in Texas pay-per-view. The young champion was led to believe that this quick turnaround was punishment for his supposed negligence, adding insult to injury. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. When The Undertaker finally had the opportunity to review the match footage, he discovered the shocking truth about what had actually transpired during that fateful tombstone piledriver.
So it took a few days before I actually got to see the footage. Mm-hmm. Sure enough, my head never touched.
Right.
Here you go, Tony.
The video evidence was irrefutable. Hogan's head had never come close to making contact with the steel chair or the mat. The tombstone piledriver had been executed flawlessly, with The Undertaker providing exactly the protection he had promised. The entire injury claim had been fabricated. Armed with this evidence, The Undertaker made the difficult decision to confront Hogan directly. This was no small matter.
So, Terry shows up, and I pull him aside, and I was like, Terry. He goes, yeah, brother. I was like, I watched the footage back of that tombstone. He was like, yeah, brother, yeah. And I was like, your head never hit.
But rather than acknowledging the truth or apologizing for the deception, Hogan doubled down with an even more elaborate explanation.
He's like, well, brother, what it was you had me so tight that when we came down, I had nowhere to move. And that's what jammed my neck, because I couldn't move at all.
This explanation was not only insulting, but also completely contradicted the basic principles of wrestling safety.
At that point, then I was like, okay. Then I knew, I was like, okay. I kind of realized, okay, I know what you're all about. And that's all I needed.
The incident changed how The Undertaker dealt with people in wrestling. He learned fast that trust could be weaponized and that some veterans would lie or manipulate to protect their spot. For Hogan, though, this became the start of a pattern, faking injuries and bending stories to serve himself. That habit would follow him for years, souring relationships and cementing his controversial legacy. The Betrayal of 1991 was just the first crack in a feud that would expose Hogan's dirty tactics and test the true character of both men, exposing the pattern of manipulation. Hogan's fake injury in 1991 wasn't a one-off. It exposed a pattern that had followed him for years. Once The Undertaker's story got out, other wrestlers shared their own run-ins with Hogan's manipulations, revealing a culture of control and deceit. In the 1980s and 1990s, veterans already held huge power, but Hogan, as the face of the company, took that influence to another level, and The Undertaker had just learned how dangerous that power could be. One of the most damaging revelations to emerge about Hogan's character involved his role in sabotaging early union efforts in wrestling. In 1986, when Jesse the Body Ventura attempted to organize wrestlers into a union to secure better working conditions and benefits, Hogan reportedly betrayed his fellow performers by informing Vince McMahon about the organizing efforts. This betrayal had far-reaching consequences that extended well beyond the immediate participants. The failure of unionization efforts in the 1980s meant that wrestlers continued to work without basic protections, including health insurance, retirement benefits, or job security. Ventura's reaction to Hogan's betrayal was one of lasting bitterness. In numerous interviews over the years, he has described Hogan's actions as a fundamental betrayal of solidarity, putting personal gain above the collective welfare of his fellow performers. This incident established a pattern of behavior that would be repeated throughout Hogan's career, the willingness to sacrifice others' interests to protect his own position. The political maneuvering extended beyond union issues into the day-to-day operations of wrestling companies. During his time in World Championship Wrestling, WCW, in the 1990s, Hogan negotiated a creative control clause in his contract that allowed him to alter match outcomes and storylines to his advantage. The consequences of this creative control became apparent in high-profile matches against stars like Sting and Bret Hart, where Hogan's refusal to lose cleanly damaged both the credibility of his opponents and the overall storytelling of WCW programming. The most notorious example occurred at Starrcade 1997, WCW's biggest event of the year, where Hogan's interference with the planned finish led to a confusing and unsatisfying conclusion that fans still debate today, but perhaps even more damaging than his. Behind-the-scenes politicking was Hogan's pattern of fabricating stories about his career and personal life. Wrestling fans and industry insiders have documented numerous instances where Hogan made claims that were later proven to be false. One of the most ridiculous examples involved Hogan's claim that he was offered the opportunity to become the bassist for the heavy metal band Metallica. This story was quickly debunked by Metallica members themselves, who confirmed that no such offer had ever been made. Another fabricated story involved Hogan's claim about the George Foreman grill. Hogan repeatedly told interviewers that he had been offered the endorsement deal that ultimately went to former heavyweight boxing champion George Foreman, supposedly missing out on millions of dollars because he was busy filming a movie. The inventor of the grill later contradicted this story, stating that Hogan had never been considered for the endorsement. These fabrications might seem harmless on the surface, but they revealed a deeper problem with Hogan's relationship with truth. If he was willing to lie about relatively minor matters for the sake of self-aggrandizement, what did that say about his trustworthiness in more serious situations, like the injury claim against The Undertaker? The pattern of deception extended into Hogan's wrestling performances as well. Multiple wrestlers have come forward over the years with stories of Hogan exaggerating or fabricating injuries to avoid putting over younger talent. The incident with The Undertaker was not unique. It was simply the most well-documented example of a behavior pattern that had been developing for years. Mick Foley, one of wrestling's most respected figures, has been particularly critical of Hogan's approach to the business. In various interviews, Foley has described Hogan's tendency to protect his image at the expense of others, calling him more of a stuntman than a true wrestler due to his reluctance to take risks or help elevate younger performers. The Undertaker's experience in 1991 served as a wake-up call for many in the wrestling industry. Other young wrestlers who had heard the story began to approach their interactions with established stars more cautiously, understanding that not everyone could be trusted to act in good faith. This skepticism was justified by subsequent events. Throughout the 1990s, stories continued to emerge about Hogan's backstage behavior, including incidents where he allegedly used his influence to prevent other wrestlers from receiving significant pushes or opportunities. The pattern was consistent. When Hogan felt that another performer might threaten his position, he would find ways to undermine them. One particularly damaging incident involved Hogan's relationship with Macho Man Randy Savage. The two had formed one of wrestling's most popular partnerships as the Mega Powers in the late 1980s, but their real-life friendship soured over allegations involving Savage's wife, Miss Elizabeth. While the exact details of what transpired between them remain disputed, the breakdown of their relationship was so severe that it reportedly included physical altercations backstage. The personal animosity between Hogan and Savage extended far beyond their professional relationship. Sources close to both men have suggested that Hogan's jealousy over Savage's relationship with Elizabeth, combined with his tendency to prioritize his own interests above friendship, contributed to a rift that never fully healed. The two men barely spoke for years, and Savage reportedly requested that Hogan not be allowed to speak at his funeral when he passed away in 2011. Another wrestler who had significant issues with Hogan was Bret the Hitman Hart. Hart has been vocal in his criticism of Hogan's backstage politics, particularly regarding a planned championship match between them in 1993. According to Hart, Hogan refused to lose to him. The impact of Hogan's political maneuvering extended beyond individual wrestlers to affect entire wrestling promotions. During his tenure in WCW, his creative control and backstage influence contributed to the company's eventual downfall. The company's inability to move past Hogan and create new stars ultimately led to declining ratings and financial difficulties that culminated in WCW's sale to WE in 2001. One of the most controversial aspects of Hogan's WCW period involved his relationship with booking committee member Vince Russo. In 2000, Russo delivered a shoot promo on live television, calling Hogan a politician and accusing him of holding back the company. Meanwhile, The Undertaker's career trajectory during this same period provided a stark contrast to Hogan's approach. Rather than using his growing influence to protect his position at the expense of others, The Undertaker became known as a locker room leader who helped guide younger talent. The difference in their approaches became even more apparent when Hogan returned to WWE in 2002. By this time, The Undertaker had established himself as the company's conscience and unofficial locker room policeman, wielding significant influence behind the scenes. When the two men faced off again at Judgment Day 2002, the power dynamic had completely shifted. In an interview, The Undertaker reflected on how their relationship had evolved, saying,
"You know what? I always looked at it like from where I was at that point to where I was at the beginning, I was in a completely different spot. So I didn't have to carry a grudge. I treated him with the respect that I think that for what he did for the business, he deserved. So I treated him that way. I was not overly friendly, but I did, if he was in the building, I always made sure to say hello and engage him in conversation."
This measured approach demonstrated The Undertaker's maturity and professionalism, but it didn't mean he had forgotten the lessons learned from their 1991 encounter.
But, I've always, like I said, from that Tuesday in Texas, when I got that answer, I knew all I needed to know about him. And, and that's the way always, then, my radar was always up anytime that I had to, interact with him. But I dealt with him. I dealt in a professional manner with him.
The 2002 feud between the two men provided The Undertaker with an opportunity for symbolic redemption. Their match at Judgment Day saw The Undertaker decisively defeat Hogan to win the Undisputed Championship, effectively reversing the outcome of their controversial 1991 encounter. More importantly, there were no injury claims or backstage drama following this match. While Hogan drew backlash for politics and control, The Undertaker built his legendary WrestleMania streak and elevated new stars. Hogan chased headlines and controversy, while Undertaker earned respect as the locker room's conscience. Their later years made the split clearer. Hogan's TNA run was plagued by drama, while Undertaker's legacy only grew. Hogan's TNA run hurt the company as he pushed himself and his friends over younger stars and mocked fans who criticized him. In contrast, Undertaker's final years were defined by respect, capped by his WrestleMania 36 farewell and 2022 Hall of Fame induction. Hogan's legacy faded under controversy, while Undertaker's grew on professionalism and respect. When truth conquers all. But perhaps the most damaging revelation about Hogan's character was yet to come. In 2015, leaked audio recordings revealed Hogan making racist comments, including the use of racial slurs and expressions of racial prejudice. The recordings, which were part of an adult tape scandal, led to Hogan's immediate termination from WWE and his removal from the company's Hall of Fame. Hogan's racist comments destroyed his image, exposing a side that clashed with the inclusive persona he built and forcing fans and the industry to reevaluate his place in wrestling history. While Hogan was eventually reinstated to the WWE Hall of Fame in 2018 after completing sensitivity training and making public apologies, the damage to his reputation was permanent. For The Undertaker, the revelation of Hogan's racist comments served as vindication of his long-held skepticism about Hogan's character. The man who had lied about an injury to protect his position was capable of much worse than simple professional misconduct. As their careers wound down, the split was clear. Hogan's legacy sank under controversy, while The Undertaker's grew on respect. What started with one lie exposed a career-long pattern: union busting, creative abuse, and fabrications, all for Hogan's gain. Yet the story didn't end there. The final chapter of their rivalry would unfold in a shocking way, forcing both men to face the ultimate consequences of decades of animosity. By the 2020s, both men were retired, but their paths couldn't have looked more different. The Undertaker shifted into podcasts and media work, mentoring talent and giving straight talk about the business. Hogan, meanwhile, tried to rebuild his image after the racist comments scandal, but mostly stirred attention with political takes and shaky ventures. In interviews, The Undertaker stayed professional and grounded. Hogan kept slipping into controversy. One of the most revealing moments in their ongoing saga occurred during WWE's transition to Netflix in January 2025. Hogan made what would be his final WWE appearance during the Netflix debut of Monday Night Raw, an event that was supposed to celebrate the company's new partnership, but instead became another chapter in the story of Hogan's declining reputation. The audience reaction to Hogan's appearance was shocking. Rather than the nostalgic cheers that might have been expected for a wrestling legend, Hogan was met with a chorus of boos from the Los Angeles crowd.
When I saw him, he was no-selling it and pushing his beer. I didn't see him. I wasn't backstage when he came.
Did you feel like giving him a hug afterwards?
No.
Here's Taker being a company man right now.
I was. Did you feel bad for him? No.
Well, hey man, I got feelings. I got feelings for people. Like, sometimes in life, things come back.
This response encapsulated everything that The Undertaker had learned about Hogan's character over the course of more than 3 decades. The Los Angeles crowd's rejection of Hogan wasn't simply about his past racist comments, though those certainly played a role. It represented a broader repudiation of everything Hogan had come to represent: the backstage politics, the dishonesty, the self-serving behavior that had damaged so many careers and relationships throughout his time in the industry. The Undertaker provided additional context for the reaction, noting
Americana kind of deal, and then obviously, you know, he gets caught on tape, you know, saying some derogatory, racist things, and you know, in this day and age where all of that is such a hot button deal. Like, I don't know what you expect. Like, people are gonna, you know, they're gonna react, and they're not gonna react in a positive way.
But The Undertaker also acknowledged that the negative reaction went beyond just the racist comments scandal.
That's probably a good point. I mean, they have access now to everything, and they do, and then they get to hear people's interviews, and so they kind of feel like they're part of that locker room. And this was somebody that was, you know, regardless of where he's at now, you know, they kind of carry a grudge about it, because, you know, he's come back before Yeah. Since all of the stuff with his, with his daughter and all the racial stuff and all that, and he's came back and he's got positive reactions.
The modern era of wrestling, with podcasts and social media, made it impossible for wrestlers to hide behind their characters. The Undertaker's candid take on Hogan showed how much he'd grown since 1991, no longer silent or diplomatic, but openly calling out the man who once tried to derail his career. Even while acknowledging Hogan's historical importance, The Undertaker maintained his critical perspective. This nuanced position reflected The Undertaker's maturity and wisdom. He could separate Hogan's undeniable contributions to wrestling's mainstream popularity from his personal failings and professional misconduct. The theme of consequences for past actions became even more relevant when considering the trajectory of both men's lives and careers in 2025. While The Undertaker enjoyed universal respect and admiration for his contributions to wrestling, Hogan found himself increasingly isolated and criticized for his past behavior. The situation reached its ultimate conclusion on July 24, 2025, when Hulk Hogan passed away at age 71 from acute myocardial infarction. The circumstances surrounding his death were complicated by ongoing health issues related to a recent surgery that had severed his phrenic nerve, leading to breathing difficulties and a rapid decline in his overall condition. The wrestling world's reaction to Hogan's death was complex and nuanced, reflecting the complicated legacy he had left behind. While many performers and fans acknowledged his significant contributions to the industry, others struggled to reconcile their nostalgia for his character with their knowledge of his real-life behavior. The Undertaker's response to Hogan's passing was characteristically measured and professional. In a statement posted to social media, he wrote, "The wrestling world has lost a true legend. His contributions to our business are immeasurable, and for that I am appreciative. Thank you, Hulk Hogan." This tribute demonstrated the grace and dignity that had defined The Undertaker's approach to their relationship throughout his career. The funeral service on August 5, 2025, at Indian Rocks Baptist Church in Clearwater provided a final opportunity for the wrestling community to come together and reflect on Hogan's complex legacy. The Undertaker was among the many wrestling legends who attended, demonstrating his commitment to honoring the professional relationship, even while maintaining his personal reservations. The presence of so many wrestling figures at the funeral, including Vince McMahon, Triple H, Ric Flair, and many others, served as a testament to Hogan's impact on the industry. But the notable absence of his daughter, Brooke, who remained estranged from her father until his death, served as a reminder of the personal relationships that had been damaged by his actions. The final chapter of the Undertaker-Hogan saga ultimately became a story about the power of truth and authenticity over manipulation and deception. While Hogan had achieved tremendous mainstream success and cultural impact, his legacy was forever tainted by the choices he made in his personal and professional relationships. The Undertaker, on the other hand, had built a legacy based on integrity, professionalism, and genuine care for the wrestling industry. His willingness to speak truth to power, even when it was difficult or uncomfortable, had established him as one of the most respected figures in wrestling history. In the end, the story of The Undertaker and Hulk Hogan is not just about two wrestling legends and their complicated relationship. It's about the fundamental questions of character, integrity, and how we choose to treat others when we think no one is watching. The truth about their relationship, revealed through decades of careful observation and honest testimony, serves as a reminder that our actions have consequences, and that those consequences may not be apparent until many years later. The phrase, "sometimes in life things come back," that The Undertaker used to describe Hogan's reception in 2025 serves as the perfect epitaph for their relationship. Hogan's manipulation, dishonesty, and self-serving behavior had finally caught up with him, while The Undertaker's integrity and professionalism had established him as one of the most respected figures in wrestling history. The ultimate victory in their decades-long conflict belonged not to the man with the most championships or the biggest cultural impact, but to the man who had maintained his character and integrity throughout his career. In exposing Hogan's dirty secrets, The Undertaker had not destroyed Hogan's career. He had simply revealed the truth about who Hogan really was and allowed that truth to speak for itself. This final reckoning serves as both an ending and a beginning. The end of one of wrestling's most complex relationships, and the beginning of a new understanding about the importance of authenticity and integrity in professional sports entertainment. The legacy of their conflict will continue to influence how wrestlers, promoters, and fans think about the relationship between public personas and private character for generations to come.
Like I said, from that Tuesday in Texas, when I got that answer, I knew all I needed to know about him. And, and And that's the way my radar was always up anytime that I had to, interact with him.
That Tuesday in Texas changed everything. The Undertaker walked into the ring with Hulk Hogan and nearly left in a coffin. For decades, he stayed silent about what really went down, but now he's opening up, and the details might destroy Hogan's reputation forever. When heroes reveal their true colors. The Undertaker has never been a man to exaggerate. For decades, he was WWE's ultimate company man, stoic, loyal, and secretive. But when he finally broke his silence about the night he says Hulk Hogan nearly destroyed him in his career, the details were absolutely damning.
Hogan claims that I heard him on the tombstone during the pay-per-view, right? So I'm thinking to myself, I didn't find out till Tuesday. I knew there was going to be another pay-per-view, but I didn't know that I was going to drop the belt back, and that came up out of nowhere.
Think about that moment. The Undertaker had just been crowned champion, a monumental achievement that should have catapulted him into superstardom. This wasn't just any title change. This was WWE betting its future on a character unlike anything the wrestling world had ever seen. And yet, within days, the belt was ripped from his hands, under the shadow of Hogan's supposed injury. To understand the gravity of this betrayal, you have to understand the climate of professional wrestling in 1991. This was the height of the Monday Night Wars buildup, when every decision mattered, when every storyline could make or break a career. Hulk Hogan wasn't just a star, he was a global phenomenon who transcended wrestling itself. He was the face on lunchboxes across America, the voice of Saturday morning cartoons, the muscle-bound hero in Hollywood movies like No Holds Barred and Mr. Nanny. To Vince McMahon, Hogan represented more than a wrestler. He was the golden goose, the cornerstone of an entertainment empire that generated millions in revenue through merchandise, licensing deals, and pay-per-view buy rates. Hogan's image was plastered on everything from action figures to vitamins, creating a multimedia empire that made WWE a household name. But empires don't last forever, and by 1991, cracks were beginning to show in the foundation of Hulkamania. Hogan's grip on fans was slipping like sand through his fingers. His act, once shiny and untouchable, was beginning to look stale and formulaic. Audiences were starting to turn, with boos beginning to trickle in from sections of the crowd who had grown tired of the same old routine. The say your prayers and eat your vitamins message was losing its luster, and McMahon, always looking 3 steps ahead, desperately needed the next big thing. That's where The Undertaker came in, a character so revolutionary, so different from anything wrestling had ever produced, that he represented a complete paradigm shift for the industry. Tall, intimidating, and wrapped in an aura of supernatural mystique, The Undertaker wasn't colorful spandex and catchphrases. He wasn't about flexing muscles and patriotic speeches. He was darkness personified, mystique made flesh, and something fans had never seen before in professional wrestling. His entrance alone, complete with haunting organ music, flickering lights, and an otherworldly presence, sent chills down the spines of audiences nationwide. Within a year of his debut, McMahon had strapped a rocket to The Undertaker's career, recognizing the character's unique potential to capture audiences in a way that traditional wrestling personas couldn't. Survivor Series 1991 was supposed to be his crowning moment, the night he toppled Hulkamania and ushered in a new era of sports entertainment. But Hogan wasn't going to let that happen without a fight, and his weapons of choice weren't limited to what happened inside the squared circle. The first red flag came hours before the match even started, in a detail that might seem insignificant to outsiders, but sent alarm bells ringing in The Undertaker's mind. Normally, wrestlers would roll into the arena around midday, maybe 1 o'clock, following a routine that had been established for years. It was part of the rhythm of the business, the unspoken schedule that everyone understood and respected. But that day, Hogan showed up early, much earlier than usual. Unusual for a veteran who knew the business inside and out, suspicious for someone who typically followed established protocols to the letter. And The Undertaker noticed immediately.
So I remember getting there about noon, and Hogan was already there. And I'm walking down the hall.
Red flag number 1.
Red flag number 1, right? So he goes, hey kid, can I talk to you, right? And he goes, hey, I got this neck injury. He says, I'm really nervous about taking your finish.
From that moment on, Hogan began playing a subtle but relentless game of psychological warfare that would have made military strategists proud. Every time he crossed The Undertaker's path that day, in the hallway, in the locker room, near catering, backstage before the match, he made absolutely sure to remind him of one thing: remember my neck, over and over and over again, like a mantra designed to plant seeds of doubt and fear. The message was crystal clear. If something went wrong during the match, if there was even the slightest mishap, the blame would fall squarely on The Undertaker's shoulders. It was a masterclass in manipulation, designed to shift responsibility before anything had even happened. And remember, this psychological warfare was being waged against a 25-year-old wrestler who was still relatively new to the main event scene. The Undertaker was new to the locker room politics, still proving himself in an industry where one mistake could end your career overnight. The last thing he wanted was to injure the biggest star in the company, the man who could make or break his future with a single word to Vince McMahon. So he did what any young, eager wrestler would do. He reassured Hogan constantly, promising over and over again to protect him during the finish, to execute the tombstone piledriver with the utmost care and precision. He had no idea he was being played like a pawn in Hogan's much larger chess game, but Hogan's supposed paranoia about his neck wasn't paranoia at all. It was strategy, pure and calculated. It was the setup for what would become one of the most controversial moments in wrestling history. When the match finally arrived, with thousands of fans on their feet and millions more watching at home, The Undertaker delivered the tombstone piledriver exactly as he had promised. The execution was textbook perfect, secure, protected, and safe. Every precaution had been taken, every detail had been considered. He knew with absolute certainty that he had performed the move flawlessly. But the moment his knees hit the canvas, Hogan began his Oscar-worthy performance.
As soon as my knees hit, I hear, "Oh, you got me, brother."
My neck and my back.
I'm like,
The crowd gasped in horror. Commentators scrambled to make sense of what they were seeing. Medical personnel rushed to ringside. And The Undertaker? He froze in complete and utter shock, his heart sinking as he realized what he believed he had just done. In that moment, he thought he had just paralyzed Hulk Hogan on live television, in front of millions of viewers worldwide. The match ended with The Undertaker victorious, but the victory felt hollow and meaningless. In his mind, he had just destroyed the most valuable asset in the entire wrestling business. The championship that should have represented the pinnacle of his career instead felt like a curse, a reminder of the moment he thought he had crippled his childhood hero. This was psychological manipulation at its finest, and The Undertaker had fallen completely into Hogan's trap. When truth becomes stranger than fiction. What happened backstage after the match was nothing short of theatrical genius, if you can call deliberate manipulation and career sabotage genius. The drama that unfolded behind the curtain was more intense and scripted than anything that had happened in the ring, and it would haunt The Undertaker for days to come. Backstage, the performance only intensified. Hogan didn't just sell the injury for the cameras, he turned it into a full-scale medical emergency that would have been worthy of an Emmy Award. The scene in Vince McMahon's office was pure theater, designed to convince everyone from the boss down to the newest ring crew member that The Undertaker had genuinely injured the company's biggest star.
I go backstage and I was asking, "Where's Hulk at?" Right? And he's laying on Vince's office floor. So I go in there, he's laid out on the floor, and here come the paramedics and stuff. So then I hear, "Somebody get my wife and kids on the phone."
This wasn't just selling an injury for television cameras or playing up drama for the fans. This was Hogan making absolutely sure that everyone who mattered, especially Vince McMahon, believed beyond any shadow of doubt that he had been seriously, potentially career-threateningly injured. The call for his wife and children was the masterstroke, the detail that would convince even the most skeptical observer that this was a genuine medical emergency. And The Undertaker? He stood nearby, completely mortified and confused, watching his hero writhing on the floor in apparent agony. His big moment, what should have been the greatest night of his career up to that point, had been overshadowed by guilt, fear, and the soul-crushing belief that his professional wrestling career might already be over before it had truly begun. For days following Survivor Series, The Undertaker carried that psychological weight like an anchor around his neck. The guilt was overwhelming, consuming his thoughts and preventing him from enjoying what should have been the honeymoon period of his first WWE Championship reign. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Hogan's face contorted in pain and heard those words, "Oh, you got me, brother."
And I'm like, "No, man," I just couldn't hear it. I was like, "No, man, I heard him. I don't know what, I couldn't put a thought together. I just thought I'd killed him."
Imagine being 25 years old, new in the company, carrying the weight of believing you had just crippled the man who was WWE personified. That guilt doesn't just eat at your confidence, it devours your soul, your self-worth, your ability to function as a human being. The Undertaker was living in a nightmare of his own making, created by Hogan's masterful manipulation. But the truth has a funny way of surfacing, especially in an industry built on illusion and deception. Until Tuesday, when he finally had the opportunity to watch the match back on videotape, tape, The Undertaker remained consumed by guilt and self-doubt. But when he sat down to review the footage, expecting to see the moment he had destroyed Hulk Hogan's career, what he discovered instead would change his perspective on both the incident and Hogan himself forever. The truth was undeniable, captured forever on magnetic tape for anyone with eyes to see. Hogan's head hadn't even come close to hitting the mat. Not once. Not even remotely close.
So I finally got to see, but by now a lot of the boys had come up to me and they're like shaking their head like his head never got anywhere close to the mat. And you watch it back, you can tell his head never touched.
It was a revelation that hit The Undertaker like a lightning bolt. He hadn't injured Hogan at all. The entire medical emergency, the paramedics, the calls to family members, the dramatic collapse in Vince McMahon's office, all of it had been an elaborate performance designed to protect Hogan's position and undermine The Undertaker's credibility. The other wrestlers in the locker room had seen it too, and their reactions spoke volumes about what had really transpired that night. These were professional athletes who understood the mechanics of wrestling moves, who could spot a legitimate injury from a fabricated one, and who knew the difference between selling and outright deception. When The Undertaker finally confronted Hogan days later, armed with the knowledge that the footage proved his innocence, the excuse that Hogan provided was so flimsy, so transparently absurd, that it only confirmed what The Undertaker had already begun to suspect. A seatbelt was on too tight. That was the explanation Hulk Hogan provided for what he had claimed was a career-threatening neck injury. Not that his head had struck the mat. Not that The Undertaker had botched the execution of the tombstone piledriver. The excuse was that The Undertaker had held him too tight during the move, essentially blaming careful protective execution as the cause of injury. It was in that moment that The Undertaker's entire perspective on Hulk Hogan shifted permanently and irreversibly. The man he had idolized, the hero he had looked up to, the legend he had been honored to face in the ring, had revealed himself to be something else entirely, a manipulator, a politician, and someone willing to destroy a young wrestler's career to protect his own position. The aftermath of Survivor Series 1991 represented more than just a controversial finish or a disputed injury claim. It was nothing short of organizational chaos, a perfect storm of manipulation, politics, and corporate decision-making that would have lasting repercussions throughout WWE. What should have been The Undertaker's coronation as the new face of sports entertainment instead became a masterclass in how one individual's influence could reshape the entire trajectory of the business. But perhaps the most infuriating aspect of the entire situation was how Hogan and WWE management leveraged the controversy to their own financial benefit, essentially monetizing the manipulation for maximum profit. When the rematch was announced for this Tuesday in Texas, scheduled for just 5 days after Survivor Series, fans initially thought they were about to witness the resolution of a legitimate controversy. The marketing presented it as a necessary follow-up, a chance to settle once and for all what had really happened between Hogan and The Undertaker. But in reality, it was all part of a carefully orchestrated bait and switch designed to extract additional revenue from an audience that had already paid once to see what they thought was a decisive conclusion. The numbers tell the story of fan disillusionment and corporate greed working hand in hand. Hogan and Vince McMahon didn't just manipulate The Undertaker and bury his championship reign. They exploited the controversy to sell an additional pay-per-view event less than a week later. Fans were manipulated into believing they needed to purchase a second show to see the real conclusion to the storyline. The fact that the second event drew significantly lower buy rates proves that fans weren't buying into the narrative, both literally and figuratively. The psychological impact of that night in 1991 would reverberate throughout The Undertaker's entire career, shaping not just his approach to backstage politics, but his fundamental worldview about trust, loyalty, and survival in the wrestling business.
Like I said, from that Tuesday in Texas, when I got that answer, I knew all I needed to know about him, and and that's the way I always. Then my radar was always up anytime that I had to interact with him.
This wasn't just disappointment or professional disagreement. This was a fundamental shift in The Undertaker's understanding of how the wrestling business actually operated behind the scenes. The lesson he learned that night, that even your heroes can betray you, that trust is a dangerous luxury in professional wrestling, that survival requires constant vigilance, would inform every interaction he had for the rest of his career. But the Survivor Series incident wasn't an isolated example of Hogan's willingness to manipulate situations and destroy careers to protect his own position. Other wrestlers would echo remarkably similar stories over the years, painting a picture of a man consumed by paranoia and desperate to maintain his grip on power, regardless of the cost to others. Wrestling fans, contrary to what promoters sometimes assume, possess an intelligence and intuition that shouldn't be underestimated. Even in the early 1990s, long before the internet made backstage information readily available, audiences could sense when something wasn't quite right. Many fans began to whisper the previously unthinkable, that Hulk Hogan had faked the entire injury for personal and political gain. When Hogan's personal scandals finally erupted into public view, the racial rant that got him blacklisted from WWE, the various lawsuits and legal troubles, the wrestling world finally got to see the man behind the carefully constructed public persona.
We grew up seeing Hogan as this great thing, and
bigger
then
in life Americana kind of deal, and then obviously, you know, he gets caught on tape, you know, saying some derogatory, racist things, and you know, in this day and age, people are gonna, you know, they're gonna react, and they're not gonna react in a positive way.
The contrast between Hogan and The Undertaker's respective career trajectories tells the entire story. Hogan had the spotlight for approximately a decade, but his influence faded as his true character was revealed. The Undertaker remained central to WWE's identity for 3 full decades, earning genuine respect and loyalty from peers and fans alike. That respect was forged during that crucible moment in 1991, when The Undertaker learned the most important lesson of his career, that survival requires the wisdom to distinguish between those worthy of trust and those who see you as nothing more than a stepping stone to their own success. The Trail of Destruction, Hogan's other victims. The Undertaker wasn't Hulk Hogan's only victim. Far from it. If you start digging into wrestling history, you'll discover a disturbing pattern of manipulation, backstage politics, and destroyed careers that spans decades. The same tactics Hogan used against The Undertaker in 1991, the psychological warfare, the fabricated injuries, the political maneuvering, became his signature weapons against anyone who threatened his position at the top. By now, you've heard how Hulk Hogan nearly destroyed The Undertaker's career before it even began. But if you think that was an isolated incident, think again. Because what happened at Survivor Series 1991 wasn't the exception. It was Hogan's standard operating procedure. Time and time again, when faced with potential competition or threats to his position, Hogan deployed the same ruthless tactics that had worked so effectively against the dead man. Let's start with the hitman, Bret Hart, perhaps the most technically gifted wrestler of his generation and everything Hogan wasn't. Authentic, skilled, and genuinely respected by his peers. In the early 1990s, as WWE began transitioning away from the cartoon-like characters of the 1980s, Bret Hart represented the future of professional wrestling. He was legitimate, he was credible, and he was exactly what the company needed to evolve with changing audience tastes. But for Hogan, Bret Hart represented something far more threatening, a wrestler who could expose everything fake about Hulkamania. The story of Hogan's refusal to put over Bret Hart has become legendary in wrestling circles, but the details reveal just how calculated and self-serving Hogan's decision-making really was. When it came time for Hogan to pass the torch to the next generation, he simply refused. The excuses were always the same variations. It's not good for business, brother. The fans aren't ready. Maybe next time. But the real reason was much simpler. Hulk Hogan couldn't bear the thought of losing cleanly to someone who represented everything he wasn't. Bret Hart's victory would have been more than just a title change. It would have been a symbolic passing of the torch from sports entertainment spectacle to wrestling authenticity, and Hogan knew it. Years later, Bret Hart would speak publicly about his frustrations with Hogan's refusal to do business, describing encounters that mirrored The Undertaker's experience almost exactly. The same psychological games, the same manipulation, the same selfish protection of position at all costs. Then there's the Macho Man Randy Savage, who might be the most tragic victim of Hogan's paranoia and manipulation. On the surface, Savage and Hogan appeared to be the closest of allies during their Mega Powers era. They were marketed as best friends, tag team partners, and mutual supporters. Behind the scenes, however, their relationship was poisonous. Savage accused Hogan of systemic jealousy and credit stealing, claiming that Hogan couldn't stand to see anyone else receive attention or acclaim. When Savage attempted to push creative ideas that would elevate his own character or storylines, Hogan reportedly shot them down, insisting that all roads lead back to Hulkamania. The breaking point came when Savage became convinced that Hogan was interfering in his personal life, including his marriage to Miss Elizabeth. Whether those accusations were founded in reality or paranoid delusion, they reveal the toxic atmosphere atmosphere that surrounded anyone who got too close to Hogan's inner circle. The resentment became so deep and personal that Savage recorded a rap song specifically targeting Hogan years later, a bizarre but telling indication of just how much anger and hurt had built up over their relationship. When someone feels compelled to record a diss track about their former wrestling partner, you know the damage runs deeper than professional disappointment. But Hogan's pattern of manipulation extended beyond just his contemporaries. Even younger talent who should have benefited from his mentorship instead found themselves victims of his insecurity and political maneuvering. Take Shawn Michaels, who by the mid-2000s had evolved from his controversial past into one of WWE's most respected veterans. When a dream match was finally arranged between Michaels and Hogan at SummerSlam 2005, it should have been a mutual celebration of two generations of wrestling excellence. The original plan called for a two-match series where each man would get a victory, allowing both to look strong while generating maximum revenue. But when it came time for Hogan to return the favor and put Michaels over in the second match, he backed out. He got his win and then disappeared, leaving Michaels holding the bag. Shawn's response was both brilliant and telling. He turned their SummerSlam encounter into an unintentional comedy by overselling every single move Hogan delivered. Every punch sent Michaels flying across the ring like he'd been shot out of a cannon. Every basic offensive move was treated like a devastating finishing maneuver. It was Michaels' way of saying, if you're not going to play fair, then I'll expose exactly how ridiculous this whole situation is. The performance has become legendary among wrestling fans, not just for its entertainment value, but for what it represented. A respected veteran's public protest against Hogan's backstage manipulation. Even The Rock, WWE's biggest crossover star and box office draw, wasn't immune to Hogan's political games. When Hogan returned to WWE in 2002, riding a wave of nostalgia and fan goodwill, his match with The Rock at WrestleMania X8 should have been a straightforward passing of the torch moment. The Rock was clearly the future, younger, more charismatic, and already establishing himself as a legitimate Hollywood star. But Hogan couldn't resist trying to control even that narrative. According to Backstage reports, he lobbied for creative control over the finish and the post-match presentation, wanting to ensure that even in defeat, he would appear strong and sympathetic. The Rock ultimately won the match, but Hogan immediately parlayed the fan reaction into another nostalgia run, ensuring that the spotlight remained on him rather than the man who was supposed to be carrying the company forward. Perhaps the most damning indictment of Hogan's character comes from his time in WCW, where his political maneuvering reached its most destructive peak. By the late 1990s, WCW was loaded with incredible talent: Sting, Goldberg, Chris Jericho, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio Jr., and countless others who deserved their moment in the sun. Instead, they found themselves victims of Hogan's relentless campaign to remain the center of attention. The Sting saga is particularly heartbreaking. After disappearing from television for over a year to build anticipation for his return, Sting was positioned as the anti-hero who would finally bring down Hogan's corrupt New World Order. The storyline was perfect. The fan anticipation was through the roof, and the payoff should have been one of wrestling's greatest moments. Instead, Hogan manipulated the situation to rob Sting of his defining victory. The finish of their Starrcade 1997 match was so convoluted and controversial that it satisfied no one and damaged everyone involved. What should have been Sting's triumphant vindication instead became another example of Hogan's refusal to step aside gracefully. Goldberg's treatment was even worse. When the former football player became the hottest act in wrestling with his unprecedented winning streak, he represented everything WCW needed to compete with WWE's Attitude Era: youth, athleticism, and legitimate toughness. But Hogan initially refused to lose to Goldberg cleanly, forcing WCW executives to book the match on free television instead of pay-per-view, essentially giving away what should have been one of their biggest money-drawing matches just to overcome Hogan's political resistance. Even after losing to Goldberg, Hogan immediately began scheming to regain his position, ultimately orchestrating the infamous finger poke of doom incident that handed the WCW championship back to his faction and destroyed Goldberg's momentum forever. The pattern was always the same: initial resistance, eventual capitulation under pressure, followed by immediate efforts to undermine and reclaim whatever he had been forced to give up. By 2000, Hogan's political machinations had reached their ultimate conclusion at Bash at the Beach, when he was finally booked to lose cleanly to Jeff Jarrett With no strings attached and no creative control, Hogan simply refused to participate. He laid down in the ring, forcing Vince Russo to shoot on him publicly and ending his WCW career in the most humiliating way possible. It was the perfect ending to a pattern of behavior that had started with The Undertaker in 1991. When faced with a situation where he couldn't control the narrative, Hogan would rather destroy everything than accept defeat gracefully. The trail of destruction left in Hogan's wake includes not just individual careers, but entire wrestling promotions. WCW never recovered from the chaos and political infighting that Hogan's behavior had fostered. Talented wrestlers left the company in frustration. Creative storylines were abandoned. Fan goodwill was squandered, all because one man couldn't accept that his time at the top was coming to an end. Looking back at this pattern of behavior, The Undertaker's experience at Survivor Series 1991 takes on even greater significance. It wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was the first major example of a systematic approach to career destruction that Hogan would perfect over the following decades. Psychological warfare, the fabricated injuries, the manipulation of management, the refusal to lose cleanly, all of these tactics were refined and deployed again and again against anyone who threatened Hulkamania's dominance. The only difference was that The Undertaker survived and eventually thrived despite Hogan's attempts to bury him. Many of Hogan's other victims weren't so fortunate.
Did you feel bad for him? No.
Undertaker's words were simple, no sympathy for Hogan. And honestly, he had his reasons. To him, Hogan's death wasn't a tragedy. It was karma finally catching up. But this wasn't just about wrestling grudges. It was about the lies, the manipulation, and the broken trust that defined Hogan's legacy. Let me break down his reasons. The beginning of the end, when the golden goose turned into a snake. To understand the depth of The Undertaker's feelings about Hulk Hogan, we need to go back to November 27, 1991, at the Survivor Series in Detroit, Michigan. This wasn't just another wrestling match. This was the night that would forever change how The Undertaker viewed the man who was supposed to be wrestling's greatest hero. The Undertaker was just 26 years old and only 1 year into his WWF career when he faced Hulk Hogan for the WWF Championship. He was about to become the youngest champion in company history, a moment that should have been the pinnacle of his early career. But Hulk Hogan had other plans.
Well, fortunately, like I was devastated. And the whole deal was, it was a setup from the whole get-go, right? So back then, we would usually show up noon, on a TV or pay-per-view day. We show up at the arena around noon, 1 o'clock. Hogan would roll in about 4 or 5. So I remember getting there about noon, and Hogan was already there. And I'm walking down the hall.
The first red flag should have been obvious. Hogan, who was notorious for arriving fashionably late to events, was already at the arena when The Undertaker arrived at noon. This was unprecedented behavior from the man who had made a career out of making dramatic entrances and keeping people waiting. But The Undertaker, still relatively new to the business and eager to prove himself, didn't immediately recognize the warning signs of what was about to unfold.
Flag number 1.
Red flag number 1, right? So he goes, hey kid, can I talk to you, right? So we go into one of the locker rooms, into the shower, right? That's where all the business was always done back in the day. You went into the shower, whether it was to fight, settle, whatever score, it always happened in the shower. So he's telling me, he goes, hey, I got this neck injury. He says, I'm really nervous about taking your finish.
What happened next was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Hogan pulled The Undertaker aside into the shower, the traditional location for serious wrestling business discussions, and began planting the seeds for what would become one of the most calculated betrayals in wrestling history. He claimed he had a pre-existing neck injury and expressed nervousness about taking The Undertaker's finishing move, the tombstone piledriver. The Undertaker, being the consummate professional he would become famous for, immediately reassured Hogan.
And I was like, Hulk, believe me. I said, I will protect you. I pride myself on not hurting people. And I promise you, I will have you so tight that there's no way possible that you're going to hurt your neck.
But Hogan wasn't finished with his psychological warfare. Throughout the entire day, every time The Undertaker encountered him, Hogan would remind him about the supposed neck injury.
Every point during the day, I'd pass him in the hall or whatnot, I'd get the, remember about my neck, right? So that's all I got all day was my neck.
This constant repetition wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate strategy designed to get inside The Undertaker's head, to make him doubt himself, and to create a situation where Hogan could control the narrative regardless of how the match actually went. Hogan was setting up The Undertaker for a fall that would protect his own image while potentially destroying a rising star's career. When it came time for the match finish, The Undertaker executed the tombstone piledriver with textbook precision.
We go into the finish, Flair comes down, slides the chair down. I pick him up, and when I tell you I had the brother secure, he was secure. Boom. I give him the tombstone. As soon as my knees hit, I hear, oh. You got me, brother.
My neck and my back.
The moment The Undertaker's knees hit the ground, the exact position that ensures the opponent's safety during a tombstone piledriver, Hogan began his performance. He immediately started complaining about his neck and back, selling the injury as if The Undertaker had legitimately hurt him. For a 24-year-old wrestler who had been psychologically prepared all day for this exact scenario, it must have felt like his worst nightmare coming true.
I'm like, yeah, I am just like, how I'm like, you have all these, like, I was 24, 25 years old, and I just crushed Hulk Hogan, right? That's what's going through my head. Like, they gave me this opportunity, they gave me the chance to run with the ball, and I just hurt the golden goose.
The term golden goose wasn't chosen lightly. In the wrestling business of the early 1990s, Hulk Hogan was quite literally the company's most valuable asset. He was the draw that filled arenas, sold merchandise, and generated the revenue that kept the WWF afloat. The idea that a relatively unknown wrestler had potentially injured this cash cow would have been devastating, not just for The Undertaker's career, but for the entire company. But what happened backstage was even more dramatic and calculated than what occurred in the ring.
And he's always laying on Vince's office floor. So I go in there, he's laid out on the floor, he's carrying on, and like I'm going in to check on him, but then here come the paramedics and stuff. So here, me and kayfabe, right? So I go behind a wall with Shane.
Picture this scene. The Undertaker has just won his first WWF championship in what should have been the greatest moment of his young career. Instead of celebrating, he's hiding behind a wall with Shane McMahon, listening to paramedics examine Hulk Hogan, who is lying dramatically on the floor of Vince McMahon's office. Hogan's performance was so convincing that he even asked for his wife and kids to be called, adding an extra layer of drama to an already tense situation.
Shane's right there telling me, he's like, Mark, he goes, his head wasn't anywhere close to touching that mat. And I'm like, no, man, I just couldn't hear it. I was like, no, man, I heard him. I don't know what, I couldn't put a thought together. I just thought I'd killed him.
Even with Shane McMahon, who had witnessed the match from ringside, telling him that Hogan's head never touched the mat, The Undertaker was so psychologically shaken by Hogan's manipulation that he couldn't process the truth. This is the power of gaslighting when executed by a master manipulator. Hogan had spent an entire day preparing The Undertaker to doubt himself, and in that moment of crisis, the psychological preparation paid off perfectly. The Undertaker was forced to wait days before he could see the footage of the match, as the technology for immediate replay simply didn't exist in 1991 the way it does today. During those agonizing days, he had to live with the belief that he had potentially ended the career of wrestling's biggest star. His family had flown in from Houston to celebrate his championship victory, but instead of a celebration, The Undertaker was consumed with guilt and fear about what he might have done.
Because there's no Monday Night Raw.
Yeah, there was no Monday Night Raw yet. Right. And we had house shows. So I finally got to see, but by now a lot of the boys had come up to me and they're like shaking their head, like his head never got anywhere close to the mat. And you watch it back, you can tell his head never touched.
When The Undertaker finally saw the footage, the truth was undeniable. The video clearly showed that Hogan's head was nowhere near the chair or the mat during the tombstone piledriver. Fellow wrestlers who had witnessed the match were telling him the same thing. There was no botch, no injury, no legitimate reason for Hogan's complaints. But by then, the damage to their relationship was already done. The revelation that Hogan had essentially lied about the injury put The Undertaker in an impossible position.
I'm still a greenhorn, right? I mean, and now I've got to confront, the face of wrestling, the biggest draw, ever. And now I've got to figure out what I'm going to do here. Like, as a man, I got to know what the hell, but I also know that it's risking my professional career.
This wasn't just about hurt feelings or professional disappointment. The Undertaker was facing a career-defining moment where he had to choose between his integrity as a man and his future in the wrestling business. Confronting Hulk Hogan, the most powerful wrestler in the company, about lying could have meant the end of everything the Undertaker had worked for. But staying silent would mean accepting that he was willing to be manipulated and lied to by someone he had trusted. The confrontation finally came at the follow-up event, this Tuesday in Texas, just 6 days after Survivor Series. The Undertaker approached Hogan with the video evidence, determined to get answers about what had really happened. What happened next would forever change how The Undertaker viewed not just Hulk Hogan, but the entire wrestling business. The unforgivable lies, how Hogan's true nature was finally exposed. The confrontation between The Undertaker and Hulk Hogan at this Tuesday in Texas wasn't just a conversation between two wrestlers, it was a moment of truth that would define their relationship for the next 3 decades. What happened when The Undertaker presented Hogan with undeniable video evidence of his deception would reveal the true character of the man millions of fans considered their childhood hero.
I got to San Antonio and I was like, Terry, I watched it back. Your head never hit. He was like, well, brother, what it was you had me so tight that when we came down, I had nowhere to move. And that's what jammed my neck because I couldn't move at all.
You're too tight.
This response from Hogan wasn't just disappointing, it was insulting to The Undertaker's intelligence and professionalism. When confronted with clear video evidence that his head never made contact with the chair or mat, Hogan didn't apologize or admit he had overreacted. Instead, he doubled down with an excuse so flimsy that it bordered on the absurd. He claimed that The Undertaker had held him too tight during the move, and this somehow caused a neck injury despite there being no actual impact. The Undertaker's reaction to this pathetic excuse was immediate and definitive.
It was too tight. And at that point, then I was like, okay. Then I knew, I was like, okay. I kind of realized, okay, I know what you're all about. And that's all I needed.
In that moment, The Undertaker saw through the facade that had fooled millions of wrestling fans for years. He realized that Hulk Hogan was fundamentally dishonest, willing to throw anyone under the bus to protect his own image. This wasn't about a legitimate injury or even a simple misunderstanding. This was about a man who would rather destroy a young wrestler's confidence and reputation than admit he had fabricated a story to explain away his loss. The revelation changed everything about how The Undertaker would interact with Hogan going forward.
I treated him with the respect that I think that for what he did for the business, he deserved. So I treated him that way. I was not overly friendly, but I did, if he was in the building, I always made sure to say hello and engage him in conversation.
This professional courtesy wasn't born out of forgiveness or respect for Hogan as a person. It was The Undertaker's recognition of what Hogan had done for the wrestling business as a whole. But the personal relationship was forever damaged, and The Undertaker made it clear that he would always keep his guard up around Hogan. And that's not the only reason he believed Hogan's death was karma. Some of Hogan's past betrayals toward others played a role as well. One of the most notable examples came in 1986, when Jesse Ventura's hatred for Hogan was fueled by an even deeper betrayal. Ventura had attempted to organize a wrestlers' union before WrestleMania II to secure health insurance and retirement benefits for performers who were classified as independent contractors. Hogan, despite earning significantly more than his peers, informed Vince McMahon of Ventura's unionization efforts, leading McMahon to threaten firings and effectively kill the union movement. This betrayal had consequences that extended far beyond personal relationships. By sabotaging the union effort, Hogan contributed to systemic problems in wrestling that would plague performers for decades. Wrestlers continued to work without health insurance, retirement benefits, or the basic protections that unionized workers in other industries enjoyed. How many wrestlers suffered from injuries, addiction, or financial problems because they lacked the safety net that a union might have provided? How many died young because they couldn't afford proper medical care? Ventura learned about Hogan's betrayal during a 1991 lawsuit against McMahon, and Hogan admitted his involvement in a 2024 docuseries. When asked if he would ever reconcile with Hogan, Ventura's response was unequivocal. Never. This wasn't just personal animosity. This was about a fundamental betrayal of the wrestling community's collective welfare. Bret Hart's issues with Hogan were equally damaging to Hart's career. At WrestleMania 9 in 1993, Hart was the WWE champion, but was scheduled to lose the title to Yokozuna in the main event. In a last-minute change orchestrated by Hogan, the Hulkster convinced Vince McMahon to let him challenge Yokozuna immediately after Hart's match, winning the title in a 22-second impromptu bout. Hart agreed to this booking under the promise that Hogan would later put him over in a return match, but Hogan refused, citing Hart's smaller size and tag team background as reasons why he wasn't marketable enough. This betrayal cost Hart what should have been a defining moment as champion, and demonstrated Hogan's willingness to use his political power to benefit himself at the expense of other performers. Hart has called Hogan a phony piece of and criticized his limited in-ring ability, making it clear that their encounter at the 2005 WWE Hall of Fame, where Hart refused to shake Hogan's hand, was just one visible sign of a much deeper animosity. But the pattern of backstage manipulation wasn't limited to these high-profile incidents. In 2000, Hogan feuded with cruiserweight Billy Kidman in WCW in what was supposed to be a program designed to elevate Kidman to a higher status. Instead of helping build Kidman's credibility, Hogan undermined the entire storyline by publicly disparaging Kidman in radio interviews, claiming he couldn't draw flies at a flea market. This public burial not only humiliated Kidman, but sabotaged any chance the feud had of being successful. Even Shawn Michaels, one of wrestling's most polarizing figures, had serious issues with Hogan's conduct. During their 2005 SummerSlam match, Hogan and Michaels had planned a series of matches where each would get a victory. However, when it came time for the return match, where Michaels was supposed to win, Hogan used his influence to ensure he remained victorious, backing out of the agreed-upon plan. Frustrated by this betrayal, Michaels oversold Hogan's moves during their match, turning it into a comedic performance designed to mock the Hulkster. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of Hogan's character wasn't just his willingness to betray fellow wrestlers. It was his complete inability to acknowledge or take responsibility for his actions. When confronted about his behavior, Hogan consistently deflected, made excuses, or simply denied the truth even when presented with evidence. This pattern of dishonesty extended far beyond wrestling politics and into every aspect of his public persona. Hogan has a well-documented history of telling outrageous lies and exaggerating stories. He claimed to have been approached to join Metallica as their bass player, a story that the band members have flatly denied. He insisted that he was offered the starring role in The Wrestler, another claim that has been debunked. He even claimed that Elvis Presley was a fan of his wrestling, despite the fact that Presley died shortly after Hogan's career began. These fabrications might seem harmless on their own, but they reveal something important about Hogan's relationship with the truth. When someone is willing to lie about small, easily verifiable facts, it raises serious questions about their honesty regarding more significant matters. If Hogan was willing to fabricate stories about his interactions with rock stars and movie offers, why wouldn't he be willing to lie about an injury to protect his wrestling career? The pattern of dishonesty became even more problematic when it intersected with serious legal and ethical issues. During the 1990s WWF steroid trial, Hogan initially denied using performance-enhancing drugs, maintaining his vitamins narrative to protect his family-friendly image. However, when faced with the possibility of perjury charges, he admitted under oath to using steroids from 1976 to 1989, contradicting years of public denials. This wasn't just about personal drug use. Hogan's willingness to lie under oath about steroid use while maintaining his anti-drug public persona demonstrated a level of hypocrisy that disgusted many of his peers. How could wrestlers trust someone who would publicly promote clean living while privately doing the opposite, and then lie about it when questioned under oath? But the most damaging revelation about Hogan's character came in 2015, when audio from a 2007 sex tape captured him using racial slurs while discussing his daughter Brooke's relationship with a black man. The remarks included Hogan saying, I'd rather if she was going to summon, I'd rather have her marry an 8-foot-tall and worth $100 million. Like a basketball player, I guess we're all a little racist. He also admitted, I am a racist to a point.
Out of everything that I've been through, this one hit me probably the hardest, and that's a heck of a thing to say, because I've been through a lot of crazy stuff.
The revelation of these racist comments led to WWE terminating Hogan's contract and removing him from the Hall of Fame. But for many wrestlers, particularly black performers, this wasn't surprising news. It was confirmation of suspicions they had harbored for years. Mark Henry stated that the remarks personally hurt him, given wrestling's history of racial stereotypes, while black wrestlers collectively demanded genuine accountability from Hogan.
I was to the point where I wanted to kill myself. I sat in my bathroom by myself when My ex-wife was gone and the kids were gone, and I was completely broken and destroyed. And
even after his 2018 reinstatement to the WWE Hall of Fame, many wrestlers and fans remained skeptical of Hogan's apologies. The pattern was all too familiar. When caught in wrongdoing, Hogan would make public apologies that seemed designed more to protect his image than to demonstrate genuine remorse. His alignment with conservative political figures, including his vocal support for Donald Trump, further convinced critics that his racial attitudes hadn't fundamentally changed. For The Undertaker, watching these revelations about Hogan's character unfold over the decades must have been like watching a slow-motion confirmation of everything he had suspected since 1991. The man who had lied to his face about a fake injury was the same man who had betrayed Jesse Ventura's union efforts, sabotaged other wrestlers' careers, lied under oath about steroid use, and harbored racist attitudes while maintaining a public persona as an all-American hero. The final judgment, when karma finally caught up to Hulk Hogan. By January 6, 2025, the wrestling world had changed dramatically from that November night in 1991, when a young Undertaker first learned the truth about Hulk Hogan's character. The industry had become more transparent, fans had access to behind-the-scenes information, and the carefully constructed facades that protected wrestling's biggest stars were crumbling under the weight of social media scrutiny. But perhaps nowhere was this transformation more evident than in the moment when Hulk Hogan walked out for his final WWE appearance at Monday Night Raw's Netflix debut, and was met with a chorus of boos that would have been unthinkable during the height of Hulkamania. For The Undertaker, watching from backstage as his longtime adversary was rejected by the very fans who had once worshipped him, this wasn't a moment for sympathy, it was vindication. After more than 3 decades of keeping his opinions about Hogan largely private, the dead man's reaction was as cold and cutting as any tombstone pile driver he'd ever delivered.
That pop was something.
It was something.
It was a pop.
It was. That was an ego pop.
Lord have mercy. Wonder what you think he went back to the dress. Well, you were there.
I was there.
What happened? What happened backstage after he came back?
No, when I saw him, he was no selling it and pushing his beer. I didn't see him. I wasn't backstage when he came.
The term ego pop was particularly cutting, a wrestling industry term for when someone gets a reaction based purely on their own self-importance rather than genuine fan appreciation.
Did you feel bad for him? No.
Hey man, I got feelings. I got feelings for people. Like, sometimes in life, things come back.
Those 5 words, sometimes in life, things come back, encapsulated 3 decades of suppressed frustration, professional disappointment, and moral judgment. The Undertaker wasn't celebrating Hogan's humiliation out of petty vindictiveness. He was acknowledging that the wrestling business, like life itself, has a way of delivering justice to those who have spent years deceiving others. But to understand why this moment felt like such poetic justice to The Undertaker and so many others in the wrestling community, we need to examine just how completely Hogan's life had unraveled by 2025. The man who had once been wrestling's golden child had become a figure of controversy, family dysfunction, and public rejection. And much of it was the direct result of the character flaws that The Undertaker had identified more than 30 years earlier. Hogan's family life had become a public disaster that perfectly illustrated the consequences of his selfish and manipulative behavior. His marriage to Linda Hogan ended in a bitter 2009 divorce that was marked by allegations of his infidelity with Christiane Plant, a friend of his daughter Brooke. The affair was confirmed by Plant in a 2008 National Enquirer interview, representing not just a betrayal of his wife, but of his daughter's trust as well. The pattern of selfishness that had characterized Hogan's professional relationships was equally evident in his personal life.
My family is in the worst mess. Brooke doesn't talk to us. She's had twins. She got married. She didn't tell us. She had twins. She didn't tell us. She had a huge fight with Terry. I don't know how that reflected onto me, but she cut me out too. I haven't talked to her for 7 years, almost 8 years now.
By March 2025, his daughter Brooke had not spoken to him for approximately 8 years, a situation that became even more tragic when we learned the reasons behind it. In March 2025, Brooke publicly stated that she had gone no contact with both parents due to extreme verbal and mental abuse since childhood. The estrangement was so complete that when Brooke married Stephen Oleksy and had twins in January 2025, Hogan showed no interest in meeting his own grandchildren. When Hogan died on July 24, 2025, Brooke chose not to attend his funeral, instead honoring him privately at a beach. Her public explanation was that Hogan hated the morbidity of funerals and did not want one, but the underlying message was clear. Even in death, their relationship remained fractured. Hogan's son Nick also brought shame to the family through his reckless behavior. In 2007, at age 17, Nick was involved in a high-speed car crash that left his friend John Graziano permanently brain damaged and requiring lifelong care. The accident led to a civil lawsuit from Graziano's family, and Nick serving 166 days in jail. As recently as November 2023, Nick was arrested again for driving under the influence, showing that he had learned little from his earlier tragedy. The dysfunction in Hogan's family wasn't accidental. It was the predictable result of the same selfishness and dishonesty that had characterized his professional relationships. When you build your life on lies and manipulation, when you prioritize your own image over the welfare of others, when you're willing to betray anyone to protect yourself, the consequences inevitably spread to every aspect of your existence. Even after his 2018 reinstatement, many fans and wrestlers remained skeptical of Hogan's apologies. The pattern was familiar to anyone who had been paying attention to Hogan's career. When caught in wrongdoing, he would make public statements that seemed designed more to protect his image than demonstrate genuine remorse. His subsequent political activities, including his vocal support for Donald Trump, convinced many critics that his racial attitudes hadn't fundamentally changed.
But what happened last week when they took a shot at my hero and they tried to kill the next president of the United States? Enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
Hogan's political turn in his final years represented the culmination of his transformation from beloved hero to divisive figure. His appearance at the 2024 Republican National Convention, where he tore off his shirt to reveal a Trump-Vance tank top while proclaiming "Let Trumpomania run wild, brother," was met with mixed reactions. His inflammatory comments about then Vice President Kamala Harris, asking, "Do you want me to body slam Kamala Harris?" further alienated fans who remembered when Hulkamania represented unity rather than division. By the time of his final WWE appearance in January 2025, the transformation was complete. The man who had once been cheered by millions was now being booed while trying to sell his Real American beer. Hogan's own explanation for the negative reaction, that fans were rejecting his political beliefs, showed that he still didn't understand that the problem wasn't his politics, but his character. The democratization of wrestling information through podcasts, shoot interviews, and social media had finally exposed the truth that wrestlers like The Undertaker had kept private for decades. Fans now knew about Hogan's betrayal of Jesse Ventura's union efforts, his manipulation of younger wrestlers, his pattern of lies and exaggerations, and his willingness to prioritize his own success over the welfare of his colleagues. When Hogan died on July 24, 2025, exactly a decade after his WWE termination, the timing seemed almost poetic. He passed away from cardiac arrest at his home in Clearwater, Florida, following complications from neck surgery and while battling chronic lymphocytic leukemia.
I've had 17 surgeries in the last 10 years.
Oh my God.
The circumstances of his death, weakened by years of wrestling injuries and the physical toll of a demanding lifestyle, served as a reminder that even the mightiest personas are ultimately mortal.
What's not original here?
The knees are fake, the hips are fake, the back's full of metal, and part of my face is full of metal. I didn't get the memo about the fake wrestling.
I was going to say.
Yeah, I missed that part.
But perhaps the most telling aspect of Hogan's death was how it was received by the wrestling community and his own family. While some peers like Ric Flair and John Cena offered respectful tributes, others like The Undertaker maintained their measured distance. The fact that his own daughter chose not to attend his funeral and that she felt compelled to publicly address rumors that he had tried to reconcile with her before his death spoke volumes about the personal cost of his behavior. From Jesse the Body Ventura, accusing him of the ultimate betrayal.
When was the last time you spoke to Hulk Hogan?
I don't know. He betrayed me.
To Bret the Hitman Hart, accusing him of career sabotage.
I can't believe that Hulk Hogan would do this to me.
Hulk Hogan may be a legend to fans, but to many fellow wrestlers, he's the villain. Here are 10 WWE stars who openly despise him, and their reasons are more shocking than you think. Doink the Clown, Matt Bourne. Let's start our countdown with a wrestler whose colorful exterior masked some very serious grievances with Hulk Hogan, Matt Bourne, better known as the original Doink the Clown. Now, you might be wondering how a clown character could have beef with the immortal Hulk Hogan, but Matt Bourne's issues with Hogan ran much deeper than wrestling storylines.
I do not have any respect for him to this day, and I would like the guy, but I don't have any respect for him. You know, I believe he's not a real person. You know? I think everything's a facade with Hulk Hogan.
Bourne accused Hogan of being phony and mistreating people backstage, claiming he couldn't respect or look Hogan in the eye due to his hypocrisy. In the wrestling business, respect is everything, and when a fellow wrestler says they can't even make eye contact with you due to your behavior, that's about as serious an indictment as you can get. Bourne's comments suggest that Hogan's backstage persona was so different from his public image that it genuinely disgusted those who had to work with him regularly.
I didn't give a about Hogan. 15 minutes. I didn't care, you know. I never put him over when he was around. I never even went out of my way to talk to him.
The hypocrisy that Bourne referenced likely stemmed from Hogan's public persona as an all-American hero who preached about training, prayers, and vitamins, while allegedly behaving in completely opposite ways behind the scenes. For someone like Matt Bourne, who prided himself on authenticity even while playing a clown character, this kind of two-faced behavior would have been particularly galling. The fact that these criticisms came from someone who never had major championship aspirations or main event feuds with Hogan makes them even more credible. Bourne wasn't motivated by jealousy over lost opportunities or buried storylines. His disdain was purely based on witnessing Hogan's character and behavior as a human being and fellow professional. Bruno Sammartino. At number 9, we have perhaps the most respected name in WWE history, Bruno Sammartino, the man who carried the company on his back for over a decade with 2 epic WWE championship reigns, totaling over 11 years. Sammartino disliked Hogan's cartoonish style overshadowing traditional wrestling and accused him of ego-driven politics. Sammartino refused Hall of Fame induction until Hogan's era passed, when Hogan emerged with his Hollywood persona and entertainment-focused approach. It represented everything Sammartino felt was wrong with the direction of the business.
This is the same guy who says that he took wrestling out of the smoke-filled little back alley, whatever he called it, to mainstream. You know, before this idiot, and I'll call him an idiot, came into the scene, there was an Argentino Rocca who was wrestling in Madison Square Garden and all the other big arenas.
The most telling aspect of Sammartino's hatred for Hogan was his refusal to accept induction into the WWE Hall of Fame while Hogan was still prominently featured in the company. Think about that for a moment. Bruno Sammartino, the man who arguably built WWE into what it became, refused the company's highest honor because he couldn't stomach being associated with what Hogan represented. For Bruno, wrestling wasn't just entertainment. It was a legitimate athletic competition that deserved respect. He had come from an era where wrestlers were expected to be tough, legitimate athletes who could handle themselves in any situation. Hogan's over-the-top character work and limited in-ring ability represented a departure from those values that Sammartino couldn't accept.
Why don't he talk about the wonderful things he did to this business by being one of the wonderful steroid chemical robots that came to this business, which is an unfortunate and tragic thing because there have been a lot of deaths, drug-related.
But Bruno's issues with Hogan went beyond just stylistic differences. He was particularly critical of Hogan's ego-driven politics and how the Hulkster used his influence to maintain his position while potentially holding back more deserving talent. Coming from someone who had voluntarily given up the WWE Championship multiple times to help elevate new stars, this criticism was particularly damning. Sammartino's immigrant background also gave him a unique perspective on what it meant to be an American hero. Bruno had come to America from Italy as a child and built his career on the values of hard work, determination, and genuine heroism. When he looked at Hogan, he saw someone who was playing a character rather than living those values, and that fundamental inauthenticity troubled him deeply. The respect that Bruno Sammartino commanded in the wrestling business made his criticism of Hogan particularly significant. When the man who is widely considered the greatest WWE champion of all time refuses to be in the same Hall of Fame as you, that sends a pretty clear message about your character and reputation among your peers. Randy Savage. At number 8, we have one of wrestling's most tragic stories of friendship turned to hatred. Randy Macho Man Savage. Savage harbored resentment over personal issues involving Miss Elizabeth, accusing Hogan of overstepping. Though they reconciled before Savage's 2011 death, Savage publicly trashed Hogan in raps and interviews beforehand.
His real name is Terry Bollea, my real name is Randy Poffo, and he disrespected me and my family through the media wave.
The personal issues involving Miss Elizabeth that drove a wedge between Savage and Hogan have been the subject of wrestling speculation for decades. While the exact details have never been fully confirmed, the suggestion that Hogan overstepped boundaries regarding Savage's real-life wife and on-screen manager created a rift that would define both men's later careers.
Here's a situation with me and Hulk Hogan. It's just, we've been acquaintances at best, never been best friends, never been friends.
The tragedy of the Savage-Hogan relationship was how their professional success together in the late 1980s masked the growing personal tensions between them. As the mega powers, they were one of WWE's most successful storylines, but behind the scenes, their friendship was deteriorating due to issues that had nothing to do with wrestling storylines and everything to do with real-life personal conflicts.
He's a wuss. You see what I'm saying? He goes on the airwaves and he disrespects me. He gives me a shot over the radio, gives me a shot over the TV, he gives me a shot over the internet, here and there, but nothing face to face.
The reconciliation that occurred before Savage's death in 2011 adds another layer of complexity to their story. Hogan's induction speech for Savage into the WWE Hall of Fame after his death showed genuine emotion and regret, suggesting that whatever had driven them apart, both men ultimately wanted to repair their friendship. But the years of hatred and resentment between them had taken their toll. Savage's refusal to work with WWE for years was partly attributed to his issues with Hogan, and their inability to resolve their differences professionally cost both men potential opportunities and earnings. Their story serves as a cautionary tale about how the wrestling business could destroy even the strongest friendships when egos, money, and personal issues collide. CM Punk. Coming in at number 7 is CM Punk, the outspoken straight-edge superstar who never held back his opinions about wrestling's biggest names. Punk called Hogan a piece of garbage and said F him in interviews, invoking him negatively in his 2011 pipe bomb promo. Punk's dislike grew after meeting him and learning of his scandals.
You put Hulk Hogan in the Royal Rumble, I'll throw his dust over the top rope, and I'll kill Hulkamania once and for all.
Punk's famous pipe bomb promo in 2011 referenced Hogan negatively, using the Hulkster as an example of everything wrong with WWE's corporate culture and star-making process. This wasn't just a worked shoot. Punk was expressing genuine frustration with how WWE operated and how legends like Hogan were treated compared to current wrestlers who were doing the actual work.
You're as good as kissing Vince's Hulk Hogan was.
What made Punk's criticism particularly damaging was that it came from someone who had no personal history with Hogan during his prime years. Punk's dislike grew after meeting Hogan and learning of his scandals, suggesting that his negative opinion was based purely on Hogan's behavior and reputation, rather than any personal grudges or professional conflicts. Punk's straight-edge lifestyle also put him at philosophical odds with Hogan's approach to the wrestling business. As someone who prided himself on being completely honest and authentic, Punk was naturally repelled by what he saw as Hogan's dishonesty and manipulation. The contrast between Punk's principled stance on drugs and alcohol and Hogan's later admitted steroid use would have been particularly galling to someone with Punk's moral convictions. The timing of Punk's most harsh criticisms of Hogan also coincided with some of Hogan's biggest scandals, including the racism controversy. For someone like Punk, who had always positioned himself as socially conscious and progressive, Hogan's revealed attitudes would have been completely unacceptable. Punk's position as someone who had main evented WrestleMania and held the WWE Championship for over 400 days also gave his criticism additional credibility. This wasn't coming from someone who was bitter about never reaching the top. It was coming from someone who had achieved wrestling's highest honors and still found Hogan's behavior unacceptable. Scott Steiner. At number 6, we have Scott Steiner, the genetically gifted superstar whose hatred for Hulk Hogan was as explosive as his personality. Steiner labeled Hogan a piece of shit and racist in shoots, citing Hogan's induction of Randy Savage, whom Steiner said hated Hogan, and airport threats. Their WCW history amplified this. Scott Steiner's animosity toward Hulk Hogan was rooted in years of working together in WCW and witnessing firsthand how Hogan operated behind the scenes. As someone who was never afraid to speak his mind or pull punches, Steiner became one of Hogan's most vocal and persistent critics, delivering scathing assessments that left no doubt about his feelings.
I got beat my first, match after turning heel.
the call was made by Hulk Hogan to have me get beat.
Steiner's labeling of Hogan as a piece of shit and racist wasn't just casual trash talk. These were serious accusations made by someone who had worked closely with Hogan during some of the most successful and controversial periods of both their careers. What made Steiner's criticism particularly interesting was his reference to Randy Savage's feelings about Hogan. Steiner claimed that Savage hated Hogan, and given Steiner's friendship with Savage, he would have been in a position to know the real story behind their relationship. This added an additional layer of credibility to Steiner's attacks, as he was speaking not just from his own experience, but from what he had learned from other wrestlers who had worked with Hogan. The Big Bad Booty Daddy's criticism also reflected his own experiences trying to reach the top of the card in WCW, while Hogan maintained his stranglehold on the main event scene. As someone with legitimate amateur wrestling credentials and incredible physical gifts, Steiner would have been particularly frustrated by what he saw as Hogan's undeserved position at the top of the promotion. Steiner's willingness to continue attacking Hogan years after their WCW days had ended showed that this wasn't just professional frustration, it was genuine personal dislike based on what he had witnessed and experienced. The fact that he continued to call Hogan out in interviews and shoot videos demonstrated that these feelings hadn't diminished with time.
When another wrestler decides he's going to decide who wins is bullshit.
Why do you think he did that?
He's a There's no other way he could say it, you know? He's a piece of shit.
He's a piece of shit. The racist accusations that Steiner made against Hogan also proved to be prescient, given the later revelation of Hogan's racist comments in the 2015 tape scandal. This suggested that Steiner may have been aware of Hogan's attitudes long before they became public knowledge, making his earlier criticisms seem even more credible in hindsight. Iron Sheik. At number 5, we have the Iron Sheik, whose hatred for Hulk Hogan became legendary through his unfiltered social media presence. Sheik frequently tweeted, "F*** Hulk Hogan," and called him out for ego and racism, stemming from their 1984 feud and real-life clashes. Sheik's disdain was public until his death.
And after I lost my belt to him, Mr. Howard, he come in the locker room. He said, "Sheiky baby, I love you. I owe you one." And after that, he never returned my call back.
The Iron Sheik's famous Hulk Hogan tweets became a recurring theme on his social media accounts, delivered with the same intensity and conviction that he had brought to his wrestling character. The 1984 feud between Iron Sheik and Hulk Hogan was supposed to be the launching pad for Hulkamania, with Sheik doing the job to help establish Hogan as the all-American hero. But behind the scenes, the relationship between the two men was far more complicated than their simple good versus evil storyline suggested. What made Iron Sheik's hatred particularly fascinating was how it combined professional and personal grievances. The ego and racism that Sheik called out weren't just general criticisms. They were specific accusations based on years of working with and observing Hogan both in and out of the ring.
But I don't like Hulk Hogan himself.
The social media aspect of Iron Sheik's hatred for Hogan was particularly entertaining because it showed how wrestling's old-school grudges had adapted to modern technology. Instead of settling their differences in the ring or behind closed doors, Sheik used Twitter as his platform to launch regular attacks on Hogan, creating a running commentary on their decades-old conflict. What made the Iron Sheik's criticism particularly credible was his willingness to maintain it consistently over many years. This wasn't just a temporary beef or a work designed to generate publicity. It was a sustained, genuine expression of dislike that continued right up until Sheik's death. The racist accusations that Iron Sheik made against Hogan were particularly significant, given his own status as an Iranian-American wrestler who had often been portrayed as a foreign heel. His perspective on racism in wrestling came from someone who had experienced it from the other side, giving his accusations additional credibility. Iron Sheik's hatred also reflected the complex relationships that existed in wrestling's territorial era, where wrestlers often had to work together professionally while harboring genuine personal animosity. The fact that their conflict persisted long after both men's active wrestling careers had ended showed just how deep their issues ran. Jesse Ventura. Coming in at number 4 is Jesse "The Body" Ventura, whose hatred for Hulk Hogan stemmed from what he considered the ultimate betrayal of wrestler solidarity. Ventura accused Hogan of snitching to Vince McMahon about his 1986 unionization efforts, leading to threats of firings. Ventura called Hogan a backstabber and narcissist in interviews and his book.
You and Hulk were once good friends.
Yeah.
What's the likelihood of that ever being repaired?
Never.
Why?
Can't trust him. I'm not friends with anyone I don't trust. I have to have a trust with someone to be their friend. And he's the one that ratted me to Vince when I tried to unionize.
The 1986 unionization effort that Ventura led could have fundamentally changed the wrestling business, providing wrestlers with health care, retirement benefits, and basic worker protections that they still lack today. Ventura rallied the locker room before WrestleMania 2, but Hogan allegedly informed McMahon, who threatened firings. This betrayal wasn't just a personal slight, it was an action that potentially cost every wrestler in the company millions of dollars in benefits and protections over the subsequent decades. The discovery of Hogan's role in sabotaging the union effort came years later during Ventura's 1991 lawsuit against McMahon over royalties, where testimony revealed Hogan's role. This meant that Ventura had to live with the consequences of the failed unionization for years before even knowing who was responsible for its failure.
And I didn't show any emotion, but I almost tipped over in the chair because he was my friend. And I thought, but then I understand why. When we went to court, I saw in WrestleMania 3, Hogan got paid more than all of us combined. Now, why would he want a union when he's getting taken care of?
What made Hogan's betrayal particularly galling was the motivation behind it. Ventura noted that Hogan prioritized his high pay, more than the WrestleMania 3 roster combined, over his peers. While other wrestlers were struggling without basic benefits, Hogan was earning more than the entire roster and actively working to prevent his colleagues from improving their situations. Ventura's background made this betrayal even more personally offensive. As someone who had served in the military and later became involved in politics, Ventura understood the importance of collective action and solidarity. His experience with the Screen Actors Guild from his role in Predator had shown him how unions could protect performers, making Hogan's sabotage even more frustrating. The long-term implications of Hogan's actions cannot be overstated. Wrestling remains non-unionized to this day, with sources citing this incident as a core reason. Every wrestler who has suffered from a lack of health care, every performer who has struggled in retirement without a pension, and every talent who has been taken advantage of by promoters can trace some of their problems back to this moment.
If you start working with WWE again, would you consider burying the hatchet with Hulk Hogan?
No.
Conversation, at least?
I don't know.
When was the last time you spoke to Hulk Hogan?
I don't know. He betrayed me.
The fact that Ventura never reconciled with Hogan, recently calling him out for his Trump rally appearances, shows that this wasn't just a temporary disagreement. Ventura's continued criticism decades later demonstrates that he viewed Hogan's betrayal as unforgivable. The Undertaker. At number 3, we have The Undertaker, whose revelation about Hulk Hogan's deception sent shockwaves through the wrestling world. Undertaker revealed Hogan lied about a neck injury from a tombstone piledriver in 1991 to avoid jobbing, calling it a betrayal that damaged trust. He discussed this in recent podcasts, highlighting Hogan's self-preservation.
I didn't know that I was going to drop the belt back and what was going on. I mean, that came up out of nowhere. But I kind of figured like, oh, okay, maybe it's because he's telling everybody that I hurt him, Hulk was still the golden goose at the time.
The Undertaker's revelation about Hulk Hogan's deception represents one of the most damaging accusations ever made against the Hulkster, particularly because it came from one of wrestling's most respected figures. When The Undertaker speaks, the wrestling world listens, and his account of Hogan's dishonesty carried enormous weight throughout the industry. The incident at Tuesday in Texas in 1991 involving the Tombstone piledriver was supposed to be a routine spot in their match, but according to The Undertaker, Hogan lied about suffering a neck injury to avoid doing the job, using a fabricated injury as an excuse to protect his character and championship status. What made this betrayal particularly hurtful for The Undertaker was that it occurred early in his WWE career when he was still establishing himself as a main event talent. Having the company's top star lie about an injury caused by his finishing move could have seriously damaged The Undertaker's credibility and potentially derailed his push toward the top of the card.
I was like, Terry, I watched it back. Your head never hit. He was like, well, brother, what it was you had me so tight that when we came down, I had nowhere to move. And that's what jammed my neck because I couldn't move at all.
You're too tight.
The Undertaker felt betrayed because Hogan later admitted it was to protect his spot amid rising stars like The Rock. This admission revealed that Hogan's deception wasn't based on legitimate concern about his safety or health. It was purely a political maneuver designed to maintain his position at the top of the company. What made Hogan's deception particularly egregious was how it potentially affected The Undertaker's reputation as a safe worker. In professional wrestling, being known as someone who injures opponents can be career-ending, and Hogan's false injury claim could have seriously damaged The Undertaker's standing with management and fellow wrestlers. The revelation also highlighted how Hogan's self-preservation instincts often came at the expense of his colleagues' careers and reputations. While Hogan was protecting his own character and storylines, he was potentially damaging other wrestlers' careers and creating unnecessary drama and conflict behind the scenes. Shawn Michaels. At number 2, we have Shawn Michaels, whose 2005 feud with Hulk Hogan became legendary for all the wrong reasons. Michaels mocked Hogan during their 2005 feud, overselling moves in protest after Hogan refused a multi-match series where he'd lose more than once. Michaels has implied Hogan's ego made working with him supposed to be a dream match between two of wrestling's biggest stars, instead became a masterclass in how personal animosity and professional frustration could be expressed through in-ring performance. Michaels wanted a multi-match series, but Hogan allegedly refused to lose more than once, which led to one of the most entertaining displays of professional pettiness in wrestling history. Rather than simply going through the motions, Michaels decided to make his frustration known through his performance, overselling Hogan's offense to selling that Michaels engaged in wasn't just unprofessional behavior, it was a calculated artistic statement about what he thought of Hogan's wrestling ability and ego. Every exaggerated bump and dramatic reaction was Michaels' way of saying that if Hogan wanted to be treated like a legitimate main event wrestler, he needed to act like one. What made the situation particularly frustrating for Michaels was that he was at a point in his career where he was putting over younger talent and helping to elevate the next generation of stars. Hogan's refusal to do the same, despite being well past his prime, represented everything that Michaels felt was wrong with wrestling's old guard. The backstage tension between Michaels and Hogan also reflected broader issues within WWE at the time, as the company was trying to balance respect for its legends with the need to create new stars. Hogan's unwillingness to put over current talent represented a fundamental misunderstanding of his role as a returning legend. Bret Hart. And at number 1, we have Bret the Hitman Hart, whose comprehensive and devastating criticism of Hulk Hogan represents perhaps the most thorough takedown of the Hulkster ever delivered by a fellow wrestler. Hart has repeatedly called Hogan a phony and accused him of sabotaging his career, including refusing to drop the WWF title to him after WrestleMania 9. In his autobiography and interviews, Hart said Hogan didn't know a headlock from a headlamp and held grudges over poor WCW booking influenced by Hogan.
He was a guy that thought he was everything in wrestling and that everyone else was, we were all backup players to Hulk Hogan, and that's the way he saw it. And once that belt was on me, I became the enemy or somebody that had to be removed.
Bret Hart's hatred for Hulk Hogan is perhaps the most well-documented and comprehensive criticism ever leveled against the Hulkster by a fellow wrestler. Hart's attacks weren't just emotional outbursts or temporary grievances. They were calculated, detailed indictments based on years of professional interaction and personal observation. The WrestleMania 9 incident that Hart frequently references represents everything that Hart felt was wrong with Hogan's approach to the wrestling business. After Hart had worked a grueling match against Yokozuna and lost the WWE Championship, Hogan allegedly convinced Vince McMahon to change the planned ending, inserting himself into the main event to win the title in a matter of minutes. This wasn't just about Hart losing a championship, it was about Hogan's complete disregard for storytelling, logic, and fairness. Hart claimed Hogan promised to drop the belt to him later, but reneged, using his backstage influence to avoid putting Hart over while making Hart look weak in the process. Hart's famous assessment that Hogan didn't know a headlock from a headlamp became one of wrestling's most quoted criticisms, perfectly encapsulating Hart's view that Hogan's wrestling ability was vastly overrated compared to his drawing power and political acumen. But Hart's criticism extended far beyond just Hogan's in-ring abilities. Hart accused Hogan of framing him as a tag team wrestler in private discussions, attempting to undermine Hart's credibility as a singles competitor, despite Hart's obvious talent and accomplishments.
I'm pissed off. I'm so mad. I can't believe that Hulk Hogan would do this to me. Like, I was a guy that always thought of him as a friend and vice versa. And this, I know I worked really hard to finally climb up that ladder to get to that spot. I worked so hard. And here he was was stopping me.
The personal nature of Hart's attacks on Hogan reflected the deep hurt and frustration that the excellence of execution felt over what he saw as deliberate career sabotage. Coming from someone with Hart's reputation for professionalism and technical excellence, these accusations carried enormous weight within the wrestling industry. Hart's issues with Hogan persisted into their WCW days, where Hogan's influence led to Hart's poor booking. This showed that Hart's problems with Hogan weren't just about specific incidents, but about a pattern of behavior that continued across multiple promotions and decades. The fact that Hart continued to criticize Hogan years after both men's active careers had ended demonstrated that these weren't just professional disagreements, but genuine personal animosity based on what Hart saw as fundamental character flaws in Hogan's personality and approach to the business. And with that, we've come to the end of this deep dive. For more juicy content like this, smash that subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications, and check out the card showing on your screen for more videos. Don't forget to comment your thoughts below.